Maybe there will be some info from this project.
Est-ce que pour la solution d'un débat d'urgence, il faut des choses comme pour les rapporteurs J'ai demandé une approbation sur les watchdogs, c'est ça, c'est un des questions. Donc, si jamais il n'y a pas d'accord, c'est bon, on a des questions, c'est ça, on a des questions. Je sais que ça se fait en fait.
La séance est ouverte. L'ordre du jour appelle notre débat d'actualité sur l'arrestation et la détention d'Alexei Navalny en janvier 2021. La durée du débat est limitée à 1h30. Le temps de parole de chaque intervenant est fixé à 3 minutes, à l'exception du premier orateur désigné par le bureau parmi l'un des initiateurs du débat qui dispose de 10 minutes. La parole est à M. Jacques Maire, premier orateur désigné par le bureau. C'est à vous, Monsieur Maire.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues, notre débat d'actualité est d'une importance tout à fait particulière. L'arrestation d'Alexei Navalny a suscité une très grande émotion en Europe et dans notre Assemblée, gardienne des droits de l'homme et des citoyens de tous nos États membres. De Reykjavik à Vladivostok, du Svalbard à Chypre. Nous avons aujourd'hui une première occasion, je dirais, de débattre de l'arrestation et de la détention de M. Navalny. Il n'y en aura d'autres. Il est important d'appliquer les mêmes normes, sans crainte ni faveur, à tous nos États membres. Il est important que chaque citoyen et chaque société jouissent des mêmes droits et libertés protégés par la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, qui est la pierre angulaire sur laquelle notre organisation est construite et l'expression la plus élevée de notre valeur commune. Comme l'a dit le président Dems en ouverture lundi, nos valeurs communes sont plus importantes que nos intérêts. Le rôle de notre Assemblée n'est pas d'opposer les États les uns aux autres, mais de protéger nos concitoyens contre les États, qui que soient nos concitoyens et quels que soient les États. Venons-en à la situation telle qu'elle se présente aujourd'hui. L'arrestation de M. Navalny, qui a suivi son retour en Allemagne, à Moscou depuis l'Allemagne, où il a été traité pour un empoisonnement en août 2020 par l'agent neurotoxique illégal Novichok, n'est évidemment pas conforme à nos valeurs. Rappelons d'abord pourquoi M. Alexei Navalny était en Allemagne. Car c'est son séjour en Allemagne qui lui est reproché par les autorités russes. Ce séjour ne lui a pas permis de donner suite à son contrôle judiciaire. Sans aborder sur le fond l'empoisonnement de M. Navalny, qui fait l'objet d'un rapport pour la Commission des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme, j'indique qu'à ce jour, la question du lieu exact de l'empoisonnement est contestée. D'un côté, le gouvernement allemand affirme que cela s'est passé en Russie. Le site d'investigation Bellingcat conforte ce point de vue et affirme que M. Navalny a été suivi pendant des années à travers la Russie par une équipe de chimistes et de médecins des services secrets. Et M. Navalny affirme qu'il a été empoisonné sur ordre du plus haut niveau de l'État de la Fédération de Russie. De l'autre, les autorités russes affirment que leurs tests n'ont révélé aucune trace de poison dans l'organisme de M. Navalny avant qu'il ne quitte la Russie à bord d'un avion spécialement équipé, médicalement, à destination de l'hôpital de la Charité à Berlin. Cependant, personne ne conteste, et il s'agit d'un fait, que M. Navalny a été arrêté à son retour d'Allemagne par les autorités russes. Donc, si son arrestation et sa détention étaient illégales au regard de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, à laquelle la Fédération de Russie est partie, nous sommes pleinement en droit d'en tirer les conclusions. Au début de cette semaine, l'Assemblée a suivi le Conseil du Bureau, qui a préféré ce débat d'actualité au débat d'urgence qui avait été proposé par la Commission des affaires juridiques lors de sa réunion du 19 janvier, juste après l'arrestation d'Alexei Navalny. Ainsi, le moment n'est pas venu aujourd'hui d'adopter une résolution fixant notre position collective de l'Assemblée sur l'arrestation et la détention de M. Navalny et sur les conclusions juridiques qui peuvent en être tirées. Mais ce moment viendra, chers collègues, si vous décidez d'adopter le principe d'un rapport spécifique sur l'arrestation et la détention d'Alexei Navalny en 2021, qui sera soumis dans les prochains jours au bureau par le comité présidentiel. Nous pouvons donc profiter pleinement de notre débat pour exprimer clairement nos opinions politiques à nos collègues russes au sein de cette Assemblée, ainsi qu'aux autorités de la Fédération de Russie et au grand public, mais aussi nos analyses qui seront utiles pour la préparation de l'éventuel rapport à venir. Quels sont les faits ? M. Navalny a été arrêté dans le cadre d'une affaire pénale qui a été ouverte contre lui et son frère Oleg en 2014, connue sous le nom d'affaire Yves Rocher. Yves Rocher, une société que les frères Navalny étaient accusés d'avoir fraudé. M. Navalny a été condamné à une peine de 3 ans et demi avec sursis et de 5 ans de liberté conditionnelle, qui a expiré à la fin exacte du mois de décembre 2020. 2 jours avant la fin de sa période de liberté conditionnelle, M. Navalny se trouvait encore en Allemagne pour se remettre des effets de l'empoisonnement au Novichok. Je l'ai rencontré à Berlin en tant que rapporteur de votre Assemblée le 17 décembre, après autorisation de la commission juridique, et je peux confirmer qu'il a fait savoir à cette occasion, directement auprès de moi-même et du secrétariat et publiquement, son souhait de revenir au plus vite en Russie. Il n'y a donc aucune ambiguïté sur sa décision de revenir sur le territoire russe et de se soumettre ainsi, de ce fait, à la justice russe. L'administration pénitentiaire lui a ordonné de se présenter à son bureau de Moscou en se référant à un article sur son état de santé publié dans la revue The Lancet par les médecins allemands de M. Navalny, pour justifier la conclusion qu'il était complètement rétabli. Il aurait ainsi manqué à son obligation de se présenter conformément aux conditions de sa liberté conditionnelle à un commissariat. En conséquence, M. Navalny sera reconduit en février devant un tribunal pour une audience sur la requête de l'administration pénitentiaire. Suite à son défaut de se présenter en décembre, celle-ci demande de faire transformer son sursis dans l'affaire Yves Rocher en peine de prison ferme. La conséquence est lourde. Il risque d'être emprisonné pendant 3 ans et demi, à moins que sa détention préventive, qui a duré 1 an dans des conditions de restriction extrêmes, ne soit prise en compte. Or, il se trouve que concernant cette affaire impliquant l'entreprise Yves Rocher, la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a rendu l'arrêt en 2017 Navalny contre Fédération de Russie. Dans cet arrêt, la Cour a estimé que les autorités russes, je cite, avaient violé le droit à un procès équitable de M. Navalny et indiqué aussi l'interdiction de le punir sans loi sur la base de décisions arbitraires et manifestement déraisonnables des tribunaux russes. Je cite la Cour. Dans le cadre des mesures individuelles indiquées par la Cour dans cet arrêt, les autorités russes ont été tenues de rouvrir la procédure pénale contre M. Navalny et son frère, et que les tribunaux russes soient tenus de remédier aux violations de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme qui ont été constatées par la Cour. En 2018, la Cour suprême de la Fédération de Russie, à la lumière de l'arrêt de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, a examiné l'arrêt et la peine prononcée par les tribunaux inférieurs russes. Elle a conclu qu'ils étaient entièrement conformes au droit interne russe et par conséquent qu'il n'y avait pas lieu de rouvrir l'affaire. Le comité des ministres est chargé de superviser la mise en œuvre des arrêts de la Cour en vertu de l'article 46 de la Convention. Il a regroupé l'arrêt de la Cour dans l'affaire Navalny avec d'autres arrêts contre la Fédération de Russie concernant la question des procès inéquitables. Il n'a toutefois pas encore examiné la mise en œuvre de l'arrêt Navalny par la Russie, le dernier examen datant de 2017. J'encourage donc le comité des ministres à examiner d'urgence l'arrêt Navalny et les autres arrêts connexes. Cela semble absolument nécessaire au moment où M. Navalny est détenu et où il risque d'être soumis à une longue peine de prison. Tout ceci repose sur des procédures pénales internes que la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a jugées, comme je l'ai dit, illégales, mais que les autorités russes ont refusé de réouvrir. En conclusion, chers collègues, l'opinion publique européenne nous interpelle. L'arrestation et la détention de M. Navalny a donné lieu à des manifestations massives samedi dernier à travers toute la Russie. Il y en aura encore d'autres. Des dizaines de milliers de citoyens russes ont manifesté, plusieurs milliers d'entre eux ont été interpellés, parfois blessés, et quelques dizaines sont encore aujourd'hui détenus. Nous avons assisté à de fortes réactions dans le monde entier, de la part des ministres des Affaires étrangères de la France, de l'Allemagne, du Royaume-Uni, d'autres États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, réaction aussi de l'Union européenne, réaction aussi du Parlement européen, de notre Assemblée, de nos rapporteurs. Mais au-delà des déclarations à chaud, nous devons agir en utilisant nos avantages comparatifs. Et j'en vois 2 qui sont essentiels à notre identité. La première, c'est la participation pleine et entière de la délégation russe à nos travaux. L'autre, c'est nos normes communes en matière de démocratie, de droits de l'homme et d'état de droit. Ainsi, c'est dans ce cadre, statut, Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, à laquelle la Russie est engagée, que nous devons agir et défendre pour protéger M. Navalny. Cela passe par la présentation d'un rapport par la Commission des affaires juridiques pour débat et à l'adoption, le moment venu, d'une résolution par notre Assemblée plénière. Chers collègues, en conclusion, je proposerai donc au Bureau de demander à la Commission des affaires juridiques de préparer un rapport spécifique sur l'arrestation de M. Navalny. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur Maire. La parole désormais est aux orateurs pour les groupes et je donne la parole à Monsieur Zingeris pour le groupe PPE.
Dear friends, Madam Chairwoman, dear colleagues, part of us were involved deeply trying to release Mr. Navalny from jail unsuccessfully. So new events happen in Russia and new fights are underway for possible future of democratic Russia. I would like to say in Russian language: Мы любим русский народ, и мы надеемся на демократическое будущее в России. But I will go back to English. It will be more understandable for European audience. So from my point of view, we should have some on the statement level what was just said by dear friend Jacques Maire. And first statement, after last week was debates and debates and debates in Committee on Human Rights, decision to have urgent, in a bureau to have current, and joy of Mr. Petr Tolstoy in his office, in his Facebook, about his victory, not having resolution at all. Let's answer about the last events in Russia through our tomorrow debates and tomorrow amendments, future cooperation with Russian Federation, looking to our challenge for substantial grounds for Russian Federation. Let's support those amendments, or some of them who you like to support. I was rapporteur, you remember very well, for years and years about Boris Nemtsov. I was not allowed to cross the border, and they declared me persona non grata in Russia. Like a rapporteur, I have no possibility to entry and to have clear documents on the ground how they killed previous leader, very European man, Boris Nemtsov. It was denied from Russia side, from current Kremlin leadership. From my point of view, we should react to that in clear way and declare that Russian delegation members will be clearly with us only in the case when they will stop the terror against their opponents. Even the local members of local parliaments was not allowed to enter the local prisons in a lot of cities during Saturday demonstration, not talking about events in Moscow. So I would like to ask our friends in Parliamentary Assembly to be active tomorrow and actually support the amendments, especially amendments to reopen the new case of Boris Nemtsov investigation in Russia. Well, first case was absolutely not enough elaborated by Russia court in Moscow. In actually, it was even fake. So we would like to ask Russian Federation to open the case, reopen the case of Boris Nemtsov, former leader. So from my point of view, I would like to ask Russian Federation to remember that they are members of Council of Europe, of all conventions. And from 96, we have probably more than 20 resolutions, and we like Russia to fulfill their commitments.
Merci, monsieur
Merci.
Méris. Merci bien. Je donne maintenant la parole à Madame Jensen pour le groupe ADLE.
Madame la Présidente, chers collègues, today this is not a discussion about terrorism. It is not a discussion about a man risking his life to fight corruption and the decay of the rule of law in his mother country. This is not a debate about Alexei Navalny per se, even though his story is a rather compelling one to tell. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a discussion, plain and simple, about upholding the rule of law and respecting human rights and our distinct duty as members of the Council of Europe to protect both. States coming together in their joint ambition to adhere to the rule of law and to respect human rights is the very purpose of this institution. Being a member means to submit oneself to the scrutiny of other member states and, most importantly, to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. Being a member of this council means humble self-commitment when it comes to upholding the rule of law and respecting human rights. And Russia, under President Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly failed to do both. Ladies and gentlemen, the case of Alexei Navalny is a particular strong example of this. Alexei Navalny was arrested upon re-entering Russia. This detainment was illegal. Not only was the sentence on which this arrest was based declared unlawful by the European Court of Human Rights, the claims of Navalny breaching his conditions of probation would not withstand scrutiny in a proper Russian court of law. Those claims are not only fabricated, keeping in mind the reason behind Alexei Navalny's absence from Russia, they are outright perfidious. His 30 days detainment was decided in an improvised courtroom. There was no due process, and Alexei Navalny was denied his right to legal aid. Plain and simple, ladies and gentlemen, Alexei Navalny is a political prisoner. This is not some modeled case about whether a particular new policy undermines democracy, human rights, or the rule of law. When riot police brutality beats up peaceful protesters, when citizens are detained for political reasons and for political reasons only, then this is quite plainly a case of a member state of the Council of Europe not abiding by the rules it committed itself to by joining this institution. And therefore, it is our solemn duty as delegates of the Council of Europe to hold Russia accountable. Navalny needs to be released alongside all political prisoners in Russia and elsewhere immediately. Or else there need to be consequences, dear colleagues. I thank you.
Merci, Madame. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Goncharenko pour le groupe des conservateurs.
Sorry. Thank you. Chère Madame le Président, chers collègues, first of all, I would like us to see the name of our topic, the arrest and detention of Alexei Navalny. But sorry, everything began from poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Poisoning by chemical weapon, by Novichok in 21st century. First it was Salisbury, then it was Alexei Navalny and Novichok. In Europe, my dear colleagues, we see it by our eyes. That's absolutely unacceptable. Then Navalny came back to Russia, and there he was arrested and detained, absolutely illegally. The last news, several hours ago, police came not to those who poisoned Navalny, because he made a film where all names are said. We know the addresses of his killers. No. Police came to Navalny, to his wife, to everybody who are against Putin and Russian Federation. What is doing Putin? Putin is taking Russian Federation to Stalin's times. Tell me, please, in 1949, was it possible for Churchill to invite to be here Stalin and his friends? And now we did it. We have a Russian delegation here. It's absolutely the same. You know, today, in 1924, this day, body of dead Lenin was put to mausoleum in Red Square. Then body of Stalin was in this mausoleum for several years. And now I understand who is next, who wants to be in mausoleum. It's Putin, who wants next to be in mausoleum and builds the country for this. He even built this mausoleum for himself near Gelendzhik Palace for $1.4 billion. So 100 billion rubles. He stole from his own people. He's killing everywhere just to build for himself this mausoleum. И я сейчас хочу обратиться к россиянам. Это российских детей бьют сейчас в центре Москвы. Даже не украинских, не грузинских, не литовских, не немецких. Это Путин бьет ваших детей. Путин обокрал вас вместе со своими шестерками и вот этими негодяями, которые здесь сидят. Вот они здесь сидят. Обокрал вас до нитки. И долго вы будете это терпеть? И долго вы будете смотреть на то, как вас бросают убивать ваших соседей, как вас превратили страну, Российскую Федерацию, в пугало для всего мира, только чтобы один безумец наживался безумно. И это в ваших руках это немедленно прекратить. К сожалению, мы здесь не примем никакого решения, которое заставит Россию, Путина поменяться. Но вы можете поменять свою страну. Вы можете выйти на улицы и сказать нет этому режиму. Режиму, который самый худший режим 21 века, здесь, в центре Европы, который убивает в России, который убивает в Украине, в Грузии, который убивает в Сирии, по всему миру. и делает это все вашей кровью. Поэтому сделайте выводы сейчас, иначе завтра будет поздно. Остановите Путина.
Merci, monsieur. Il y a un appel au règlement? Oui? Motion d'ordre. Monsieur Tolstoy, je vous écoute.
Госпожа председатель, мы в этом зале обсуждаем доклад на достаточно серьезную тему. Я попрошу вас оградить нас, нашу делегацию, от хамства вот этих вот наших украинских коллег. Недопустимо в этом зале такие применять выражения, которые только что использовал господин Гончаренко. Поэтому я лично считаю, что это вполне во власти председателя. Спасибо.
J'ai pris acte de vos propos, monsieur Tolstoy. Je pense qu'il y a une liberté d'expression au sein de l'hémicycle à partir du moment où il y a un respect des uns envers les autres, à minima. J'aimerais qu'on continue ce débat du mieux possible et je donne donc la parole à monsieur Unko pour le groupe de la gauche unitaire.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Ich will versuchen, etwas Ruhe wieder in die Debatte zu bringen. Für die Fraktion der Vereinigten Linken ist es klar, dass wir die Inhaftierung von Herrn Nawalny verurteilen und auch wenn übermäßig vorgegangen wird gegen Proteste in Russland. Wir sind der Meinung, dass Menschen, die aus politischen Gründen inhaftiert werden, dass die nicht inhaftiert werden sollten, selbst dann, was ja wohl auch jetzt in Russland der Fall ist, wenn es sozusagen formale Konstruktionen gibt, die zu ihrer Verhaftung führen. Wir haben ja unter den Mitgliedstaaten des Europarats diverse Fälle. Das betrifft natürlich Herrn Nawalny, das betrifft aber auch Herrn Demirtas und Kavala in der Türkei. Das betrifft auch in einer anderen Form auch Julian Assange in Großbritannien oder die katalanischen Politiker, die im Gefängnis sind. Grundsätzlich gilt, Menschen sollten nicht aus politischen Gründen inhaftiert werden oder gar, wie hier der Vorwurf ja auch ist, vergiftet werden. Das ist ein Prinzip, was wir als Linke vertreten. Zur Frage, die ja auch im Raum steht, der Vergiftung, kann ich wenig sagen. Wir haben im Deutschen Bundestag Anfragen gestellt hier an die Bundesregierung bezüglich Rechtshilfegesuchen der russischen Seite. Dazu haben wir Abgeordneten keine Informationen bekommen. Also deswegen kann ich dazu auch leider nicht so viel sagen. Zu der Situation in Russland, weil nach meinem Eindruck ist es schon so, dass es seit mindestens einem Jahr schon länger eine wachsende Unzufriedenheit in der Russischen Föderation gibt. Das betrifft sowohl die demokratischen Rechte, aber auch soziale Rechte. Das wird oftmals sehr wenig wahrgenommen, auch hier im Westen. Es ist ein breiter Protest, der ist nicht nur bezogen auf die Person Nawalny. Da spielen auch sehr viele soziale Fragen eine Rolle. Und ich denke, dass es eine ganz wichtige Aufgabe sein wird der Parlamentarischen Versammlung, dazu beizutragen, dass die anstehenden Wahlen im September, die Duma-Wahlen in Russland, dass sie möglichst frei und fair sind, dass wir unseren Beitrag dazu leisten sollten, damit sozusagen auch der Wille der russischen Bevölkerung bei diesen Wahlen möglichst zum Ausdruck kommt. Aber um es nochmal zu sagen, die konkrete Verhaftung von Nawalny kritisieren wir auch als Linksfraktion. Vielen Dank.
Merci, monsieur. Je donne maintenant la parole à
in Russland befassen. Und ich glaube, es wird deutlich, und das ist, glaube ich, sehr wohltuend bei Jacques Mayer deutlich geworden, es ist viel besser, wenn wir uns mit diesen inhaltlichen Fragen beschäftigen und nicht die ganze Zeit hier mit Verfahrensfragen auffallen. Es ist auch nicht gut, wenn wir uns gegenseitig beleidigen. Das macht keinen Sinn. Und es macht auch keinen Sinn, wenn wir über Lenin oder oder Stalin hier miteinander diskutieren. Ich kenne Herrn Nawalny persönlich nicht, vielleicht lerne ich ihn mal kennen. Ich weiß gar nicht, ob das ein guter Politiker ist oder nicht. Keine Meinung zu seinen persönlichen Positionen. Darum geht es aber auch gar nicht. Und ob das innenpolitisch geschickt ist, ihn so zu behandeln, wie das getan wird, ist dann auch nochmal eine ganz spannende Frage. Was ich allerdings weiß, ist, dass Russland Mitglied dieses Europarats ist. Und dass man, wenn man diesem Europarat beitritt, muss man ja nicht, man muss auch nicht dabei bleiben. Und wenn man hier Mitglied ist, dann gibt es bestimmte Regeln und gibt es bestimmte Dinge, die man entsprechend einhalten muss. Und dazu gehört, Oppositionelle nicht zu vergiften. Und wer das nicht glauben will, kann wirklich bei Bellingcat mal nachlesen, wo sehr minutiös aufgeführt ist, wie die Dinge geschehen sind. Und ich habe keinen Zweifel, dass das geschehen ist. Es gehört nicht dazu, wenn man hier Mitglied ist, die Opposition zu unterdrücken. Es gehört nicht dazu, Demonstrationen zu verbieten und am Ende Demonstrantinnen und Demonstranten niederzuknüppeln oder zu inhaftieren. Wir reden hier immer über, oder ich rede hier immer über rote Linien. Ich will über alles reden, miteinander, mit der russischen Delegation, über all diese Fragen. Und trotzdem gibt es bestimmte Dinge, die nicht gehen. Und die Liste wird jedenfalls immer länger und es wird schwieriger, auch für diejenigen, die hier konstruktiv zusammenarbeiten wollen, diese konstruktive Zusammenarbeit aufrechtzuerhalten. Es gibt Regeln, die gelten bei uns zu Hause, bei jedem in der Familie, die gelten in jedem Nationalstaat, die gelten aber eben auch hier für uns im Europarat. Und die rote Linie, es hilft nichts. Die rote Linie, eine der roten Linien ist die Umsetzung der Gerichtsurteile der höchsten Institution des Heiligtums, wie ich es immer nenne, dieses Europarats, und das ist der Europäische Gerichtshof für Menschenrechte. Jacques Maire hat die Zeit nicht dazu ausführlich ausgeführt, dass es ein klares Urteil gibt, dass Herr Nawalny nicht im Gefängnis jetzt sein darf, dass es 7-mal Urteile gab, wo Herr Nawalny Recht bekommen hat gegen Russland. Und ich erwarte nichts anderes, als dass Russland als Mitglied des Europarats diese Gerichtsurteile umsetzt. Deswegen klare Forderungen: Lassen Sie Herrn Nawalny frei umgehen. Zweitens, sorgen Sie für die Sicherheit im Gefängnis. Die ganze Welt schaut zu, was dort passiert. Drittens, lassen Sie die Demonstrantinnen und Demonstranten frei. Keine Sanktionen gegen Demonstrantinnen und Demonstranten. Und lassen Sie vor allen Dingen auch in den nächsten Tagen und Wochen Demonstrationen zu. Das gehört entsprechend zu freien Demokratie in jedem Land. Deswegen bitte, wenn wir uns mit dem Fall noch näher beschäftigen müssen in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten, sorgen Sie dafür, dass Russland den Europarat respektiert in seinen Regeln. Dann können wir auch konstruktiv zusammenarbeiten.
Merci, Monsieur Schwab. Je continue avec la liste des orateurs. Maintenant, c'est Monsieur Kiljunen de Finlande. C'est à vous.
Madame President, я хочу сказать некоторые слова по-русски первых. Мне очень жалко эта ситуация, очень жалко. Мы работали довольно много, чтобы русские делегаты могут участвовать в этой сессии здесь вместе с нами. Это наш общий дом, и у нас есть общие принципы, что соединяются. Это жалко, у нас есть сейчас такая же дискуссия, как у нас есть. Это очень ясно, что это условия общие за нас. Никакие исключения, это условия для всех. И мы уважаем тоже это принципы, и никакие исключения тоже там. Это не помогает сказать, что там есть никакие проблемы, какая-то другая страна или так далее. Один плохо не сделает, другая ситуация плохо, хорошо. И это очень хочу сказать. Madam President, after me, there is Mr. Tolstoy will speak on behalf of the Russian delegation. He is the head of the Russian delegation. And I have few remarks concerning this Navalny case, especially to him. And I would appreciate that he would listen my remarks. It is true, it's not clear who and why Navalny was poisoned. That's open question. We don't have evidence on that yet. But what is clear? There is no proper investigation done on the case. That is very much clear. Secondly, I can say so that there are people and authorities in Russia who may like or may not like Navalny, but what is clear, he is arrested on the reasons and ground that the European Court of Human Rights don't see valid. Rule of law is rule of law for everybody. Madam Chair, also, Navalny may be serious or not serious politician. He may be good or not bad. I don't know either. but he has as a basic human rights freedom of expression and freedom of association. That's his right like a human being in our общий-дом, our common home. And fourthly, Russia might be a sovereign democracy as they call it, but in every democratic system, the crucial cornerstone is what is the role of opposition. The role of opposition is a crucial one, and the right for challenge those in power is a crucial right in democratic society everywhere, irrespective of them being sovereign or non-sovereign. Mr. Navalny tried to be a candidate for presidential election last time, and on dubious ground, it wasn't allowed to do so. The democracy doesn't function in proper way. Why? That's my question.
Merci. La parole est à Monsieur Vlasenko d'Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say that today's topic is not the topic of Mr. Navalny, let's be honest. Despite the fact that Mr. Navalny is a prominent corruption fighter and one of the leaders of the Russian opposition. That's the topic of attitude of Russian state towards the rule of law, the human rights, and the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. And that is the topic, how the Russian Federation as a state is reacting on any sensitive to them question. So we are saying that there is a decision of ECHR on Mr. Navalny case. And Mr. Tolstoy is answering, ECHR is a politicized organ. I'm quoting Mr. Tolstoy. He said that during the Legal Affairs Committee meeting. The ECHR is politicized organ and we are not going to implement these decisions. So that's the attitude of the Russian Federation towards that. When we start hearing in the Legal Affairs Committee about the Navalny case, what the Russian delegation did, Mr. Tolstoy wrote a letter to the head of the Legal Affairs Committee, Mr. Tselevich, and said that we are not going to participate in that because, I'm quoting, we concerned that the hearings on the incident with Mr. Navalny are being organized with the only aim of confirming predetermined versions and reinforcing anti-Russian sentiments in the assembly. So what we are doing now, from the point of view of Mr. Tolstoy, is confirming predetermined versions and reinforcing anti-Russian sentiments. So that's the attitude of them. If that attitude would not be changed, nothing will happen. So the same attitude we have on the question of the illegally occupied Crimea. Even after the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, which stated directly on the 14th of January that the Russian state controlled the Crimea Peninsula at the end of February, not after the so-called referendum, but at the end of February. What said Mr. Tolstoy on that? I'm quoting, the Crimea was, is, and will be Russian. So if that attitude will not be changed, nothing will happen. And every day we will receive the occupation of the territories, we will receive the poisoned people, we will receive the killing of the opposition in this country, we will receive the beating of the people of this country, and we will be debating, and we will be sharing concerns. Let's continue sharing concerns. That is not effective. We should find an effective mechanism how to push the country who violates the basic principle of this organization should be punished. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Tolstoy de Russie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci, chers collègues. Я буду говорить по-русски. Дискуссия иногда похожа на митинг в некоторых выступлениях. И это понятно. К сожалению, большинство, в том числе из присутствующих в этом зале, находится под властью мифов, которые распространяются и о России, и о деле Навального. Я согласен с моим коллегой Жаком Мэром о том, что ценности важнее, чем любые интересы. Базовой ценностью Организации Совета Европы является верховенство права. Так по какому праву, уважаемые коллеги, вы сейчас в отношении дела Навального опираетесь не на факты, а на мнение. Каким образом вы говорите об отравлении, если на эту тему нет решения суда? Каким образом вы говорите о тысячах брошенных в тюрьму, что вообще просто чистая ложь после демонстрации? Там несколько десятков человек, как правильно сказал докладчик, находятся под арестом, а все остальные выпущены. Зачем это делать? Зачем наша ассамблея принимает решения на основании каких-то пропагандистских штампов? Вот, возвращаясь к истории по поводу задержания Навального, это дело Ив Роше, и докладчик о нем прекрасно знает, мы говорили с Жаком Мэром по этому поводу. В определении Европейского суда по правам человека нет ни слова о том, что Навальный и его брат не занимались незаконными деяниями. Нет ни слова о том, что они невиновны. И именно поэтому российский суд оставил приговор в силе, и именно поэтому у него было условное наказание, и он не выполнил условия условного наказания, и поэтому был арестован. Он не политический заключенный, каким вы его здесь представляете, и каким он сам хочет казаться. Теперь, что касается расследования. Россия предприняла огромное количество усилий для того, чтобы установить, что произошло с Навальным в самолете. Россия спасла ему жизнь, потому что это сделали омские врачи и пилот самолета, который посадил этот самолет. Но знаете ли вы, что перед тем, как самолет должен был срочно сесть с больным Навальным в Омск, был звонок из Германии со словами о том, что омский аэропорт заминирован. Вот я бы не хотел, чтобы наша дискуссия минировала будущее Совета Европы и будущее отношений России с Европой. Конечно, мы готовы сотрудничать вместе с вами, но опираясь на факты, а не на выкрики и наглые пропагандистские клише, которые сегодня мы, к сожалению, слышим в этом зале на протяжении всей сессии. Спасибо.
Merci, monsieur. La parole est maintenant à monsieur Gatelin de France.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente. Mes chers collègues, nous débattons aujourd'hui dans le cadre de ce débat d'actualité des derniers soubresauts de l'affaire Navalny qui, permettez-moi l'expression, empoisonne depuis de nombreuses années déjà la situation politique en Russie. Et je vous le dis franchement, les atteintes aux droits de l'homme dans cette affaire est telle qu'un débat d'urgence eût été, à mon sens, préférable plutôt que celui-ci. Alors, on nous a expliqué que ce que nous avions décidé en comité des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme, le bureau nous a dit que ce n'est pas possible parce que ça veut dire qu'il y a une résolution et nous aurions peut-être pas eu la majorité qualifiée pour une résolution. Moi, je sais une chose, je fais de la politique. Je sais qu'en politique, parfois nous gagnons, parfois nous perdons. Mais à coup sûr, quand nous ne menons pas le combat et quand nous n'allons pas à une bataille, quand nous n'allons pas à une élection, nous perdons à tous les coups. Alors là, on le sait, Alexei Navalny a été victime d'un empoisonnement au Novichok, d'un agent neurotoxique chimique à usage militaire, mis au point en ex-Union soviétique et interdit par la Convention internationale des armes chimiques. Il a dû être transporté en Allemagne pour être soigné. Je suis ravi que M. Tolstoï amène de nouveaux éléments et précisions qu'on aimerait bien pouvoir vérifier. En tous les cas, à son retour d'Allemagne, il a été à nouveau arrêté et lors d'une audience improvisée dans un commissariat de police, il a été entendu sans son avocat et il a été condamné à 30 jours de détention. Alors, suite aux manifestations et aux arrestations, parce qu'on nous dit ah ben, on a gardé que quelques dizaines de personnes, mais enfin on en a quand même arrêté plusieurs milliers, et là c'est quand même inquiétant, nous ne pouvons l'accepter. Et les ministres des Affaires étrangères du G7 ont adopté une position ferme hier. Nous devons également faire preuve de la plus grande fermeté dans cette affaire. Il en va de l'honneur de notre Assemblée et du Conseil de l'Europe. Alors ce matin, dans une réunion de mon groupe, l'ALDE, on m'a dit, tu es un hardliner, c'est-à-dire tu es un tenant de la ligne dure vis-à-vis de la Russie. J'aime trop ce pays et son peuple pour être contre ce pays. Je suis simplement un legal liner. Je suis un tenant de la ligne juridique et légale, quelque chose qui devrait être compréhensible et même la norme dans cette noble institution. Alors, je vous dirais, je ne suis pas naïf. Je sais que la démocratie, tout comme Rome, ne se construit pas en un jour. Je sais aussi que certains pays sont en transition démocratique. Et dans ce cas-là, il est intéressant de voir quelle direction on prend dans cette transition. Est-ce qu'on va vers plus de démocratie ou est-ce qu'on va vers moins de démocratie? Et je veux dire que cette transition, pour conclure, elle est longue, mais en tous les cas, elle ne saurait s'arrêter à un poste de police dans un aéroport. Je vous remercie.
Merci, monsieur. Normalement, monsieur Wickel de Suède devrait être des nôtres. Est-ce qu'il est là? Monsieur Wickel, en ligne? Non? Je vais passer la parole dans ce cas-là à madame Eversdottir d'Islande. Oui, elle est là. Bon, nous attendons quelques secondes. Suna. Oui, alors, on va attendre. Ah, elle se reconnecte, non? Bon, alors on va prendre quelqu'un d'autre en attendant. Je propose à madame Yasko d'Ukraine de prendre la parole, s'il vous plaît. Oui? Eh ben, merci. Je vous en prie.
Yes, thank you. Dear colleagues, I want to ask you to think about one question. Do you think about what Europe you want to live in? Do you think what do you want to have in European countries in 10, 20, 30 years? It's not a secret that, unfortunately, disinformation that is spreading by Russian Federation is influencing many ones in European capitals. It's also not a secret that Russian cash, unfortunately, is undermining Europe. Russia is interested to have Europe weaker. And I believe that Navalny case is the case that gives us an opportunity to think about the vision of Europe, what we want to have. It's not a secret that the dialogue with Russia is poisoned. And while Navalny remains in prison, European institutions have no moral right to exchange it for economic benefits. No gas benefits, no financial benefits. I understand this argument with difficulty, but is there any red line? Is there any rule that is at least respected by the Russian Federation? Case of Navalny is an opportunity for us to decide what vision for Europe we want to have. Do we understand that by this making compromises with aggressor and no setting of the red line and no rules and tolerating this aggression is actually undermining the future and the peace of Europe? Or using a chemical weapon is not enough? Or imprisonment for political reason is not a red line? Or supporting Syrian military is not enough? Russia is doing it through the Black Sea, through occupied Crimea. It's not enough? I'm asking all of you, in Navalny case, to think not only about Russia, but to think about our Europe. Because if we don't act on Navalny, it undermines our peace and democracy and the freedom of speech, rule of law, everything that is so important for this organization. And if we want to save it, we need to act. Thank you.
Merci, madame. Est-ce qu'on a madame Eversdottir? Ah, parfait. Bonjour, à vous de parler.
Bonjour, Madame President. Merci. Dear colleagues, Mr. Navalny's arrest and the massive public protests that followed are an important moment in Russia's political life. They attracted attention from around the world. We must take this into account in our work. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights is currently preparing a report on the question of political prisoners in Russia, for which I am the rapporteur. The situation of Mr. Navalny was already a central issue in this report. Mr. Navalny has won 7 cases against the Russian Federation before the European Court of Human Rights. These cases involve unlawful arrest and detention and violations of his freedom of expression and assembly. The European Court has made several findings that the actions of the Russian authorities were politically motivated. The Court's judgments are set out in my introductory memorandum from last year. One of these judgments concerns the so-called Yves Rocher case. The European Court said that Mr. Navalny's conviction and sentence in this case had violated the European Convention on Human Rights. It ordered Russia to reopen the case and remedy these violations. Russia is obliged under the Convention to implement the judgments of the European Court, but the Russian Supreme Court refused to reopen the case. 10 days ago, Mr. Navalny was arrested on a warrant relating to the Yves Rocher case. Instead of remedying the violations of Mr. Navalny's rights, the Russian authorities have relied on them to detain him once again. Our current affairs debate today rightly focuses on Mr. Navalny's recent arrest, but it should not be seen in isolation. Mr. Navalny is far from the only victim of politically motivated arrest and detention. His case may be emblematic today, but there are many others that are less well known. Last December, our committee held a hearing with the Russian NGO Memorial as part of the preparation of my report. Memorial lists around 350 current political prisoners. What is happening to Mr. Navalny is far from exceptional. Mr. Navalny's case will form the centerpiece of my report, but I will also look at the bigger picture. We must not forget all the other people who may be political prisoners in Russia. We must examine the wider context so that our conclusions are accurate and complete. I'm sure that other rapporteurs will also examine recent events, including the Monitoring Committee and our next rapporteur on the execution of judgments of the court. I cannot speak for them, but for myself, I can assure you that the views expressed today will be reflected in my report, and I look forward to the rest of today's debate. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Hammarberg de Suède, qui est en ligne.
Thank you very much. My focus is human rights. And in human rights, we are supported by the agreements which have been reached earlier on. The court we have is an extremely important body. And I think it should be obvious that every decision taken by our court should be respected by the member states. So for me, there is no question about that point when it comes to this discussion. The ruling of the court just should be reflected. And this, of course, will be one of the major issues if that is not acted upon by the members of our body, which will go to Moscow fairly soon, according to the invitation that we have got again. So that's the first point. The other point I would like to raise relates to what has been called the Novichok case. I think it is absolutely not satisfactory that there is a lack of total clarity when it comes to what really happened. We have very strong evidence from the doctors in Germany when it comes to what really was behind this poisoning of Navalny. And I think there is absolutely a clarity, very important that there is clarity about this. This is not the first time there have been cases of Novichok events. We think about the cases in United Kingdom, for instance. I am really worried about the tendency here and the lack of clarity and the investigation done by bodies which may be actually behind the actions of Novichok, and that is not acceptable. We have to remember that there is an international convention against using chemical weapons, And if you look at what has been discussed when it comes to that convention, it's very clear that use of Novichok, especially, of course, for political purposes, is absolutely not being accepted. So I think there is really a need to go in depth when it comes to clarifying who is behind the Novichok actions and what should be done in order to secure that this will never happen again. And there, I think the Council of Europe could play a very important role. There is a need of an international reaction against the that kind of poisoning of political people in their attempts to work on a future when it comes to respect for human rights.
Merci, monsieur. La parole est maintenant à monsieur Nick d'Allemagne.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, lassen Sie mich zu Beginn in aller Klarheit und Deutlichkeit feststellen, der Fall Nawalny ist in allen seinen Dimensionen keine innenpolitische Angelegenheit, keine Frage nationaler Souveränität. Nein, er hat in allen Dimensionen, was die Vergiftung, die Verhaftung und den Umgang mit den Protesten gegen die Verhaftung angeht, eine internationale Komponente, eine Komponente des Völkerrechts und auch eine Komponente, die den Europarat, die unsere Institution unmittelbar betrifft. Lassen Sie mich, es war auch, und der Fall Nawalny ist auch keine bilaterale deutsch-russische Frage. Ich will das ausdrücklich hier noch einmal unterstreichen. Es war selbstverständlich, dass Deutschland der Bitte der Familie und einer zivilgesellschaftlichen Organisation nachgekommen ist, eine medizinische Behandlung von Herrn Nawalny in der Berliner Charité zu ermöglichen. Und wir haben ihn dort auch unter den Schutz der Bundespolizei gestellt. Ich darf daran erinnern, dass es eine Interim Measure, eine Eilentscheidung des Gerichtshofs für Menschenrechte hier war, die auch mit dazu beigetragen hat, dass er aus Russland ausreisen konnte und diese Behandlung möglich wurde. Wir haben die Untersuchung von deutscher Seite unmittelbar auch immer unter die Kontrolle der OPCW in Den Haag gestellt. Denn allein schon der Besitz, geschweige denn der Einsatz eines chemischen Kampfstoffes ist ein inakzeptabler Verstoß gegen internationales Völkerrecht. Und wir haben dies immer international und nicht bilateral verfolgt. Wir haben die Aufklärung durch die OPCW und die von ihr zertifizierten Labore unterstützt. Und wir haben selbstverständlich auch die Arbeit des Kollegen Jacques Meyer als Berichterstatter des Europarates der Parlamentarischen Versammlung unterstützt. Er war noch Mitte Dezember zu einem Besuch in Berlin und hat dort auch Zugang zu Herrn Nawalny gehabt. Und ich will betonen, das, was wir am vergangenen Wochenende erlebt haben mit der Verhaftung und Inhaftierung von mehr als 3000 Demonstranten in der Russischen Föderation, auch das ist ein Thema, das uns alle betrifft. Auch die russische Verfassung enthält das Recht auf freie Meinungsäußerung und Versammlungsfreiheit. Aber es ist auch völlig klar, dass diese Verhaftungswelle für ein Mitgliedsland des Europarates inakzeptabel ist und gegen unsere Regeln und Standards verstößt. Meine Regierung, der Bundesaußenminister hat ja gestern als Vorsitzender des Ministerkomitees hier gesprochen, hat die umgehende Freilassung von Nawalny und den anderen Verhafteten gefordert. Wir unterstützen weiterhin die Aufklärung. Wir wollen, das ist gesagt worden, uns hier nicht über Geschäftsordnungsfragen, über Verfahrensfragen auseinandersetzen, sondern in der Substanz dessen, was den Europarat betrifft, Schutz der Menschenrechte, der Rechtsstaatlichkeit und der pluralistischen Demokratie. Das ist unser Auftrag, das ist unsere Aufgabe und dem werden wir auch in dieser Frage mit allem Engagement nachkommen. Herzlichen Dank.
Merci, monsieur Nick. La parole est à monsieur Budrikis de Lettonie.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair, dear colleagues. Firstly, I'm truly saddened about the events taking place on Monday on the vote on whether this debate should be urgent or not. But that's not the matter of the subject of this evening's debate. This debate should be not be about a certain person, about a certain name. The debate is all about whether it is a single abuse of power in the Russian Federation, or it is just becoming a norm to be detained, to be prosecuted, to be incarcerated, and fully torn from human rights as citizens who are just expressing their democratic stance. This debate is not only about Mr. Navalny or palaces or vineyards for that matter. The debate should be about almost those 3,500 people who were stripped away of their rights. It's a small city who has been under arrest for the time being. There should have been a resolution. There should have been a call for action, a call for release of Mr. Alexei Navalny and all the political prisoners. Dear colleagues, more than 20 years ago, Russian Federation joined this great organization, and they signed the Convention on Human Rights. But we see that numerous times this country has ignored even the formal name of this convention, and it is to protect the fundamental freedoms. Dear colleagues, with our tolerance and self-blinded attitude, we have let this elephant in the glass shop do its thing, to stomp on human rights and ignore the vital principles of this organization. And this brings me to the following, that we need to call for an immediate release of all political prisoners, release of Mr. Alexei Navalny himself, and to postpone the ratification of credentials of members of the Russian delegation, because as seen, Russian Federation doesn't want to fulfill their commitments to the Council of Europe. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues.
Merci à vous. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Kern pour la France.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente, mes chers collègues. Comme déjà évoqué, le 17 janvier 2021, dès son retour en Russie, Alexei Navalny a été arrêté par les autorités russes, de même que les personnes qui l'attendaient à son arrivée. Le lendemain, entendu sans son avocat lors d'une audience improvisée au commissariat de police, il a été condamné à 30 jours de détention. Les autorités russes s'appuient pour cela sur des décisions de justice que la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a qualifiées d'arbitraires, dictées par des motivations politiques et visant à étouffer le pluralisme politique. Nous le savons, Alexei Navalny a fait l'objet d'un empoisonnement au Novichok qui constitue une atteinte très grave aux droits de l'homme, à la démocratie et au pluralisme politique. Et permettez-moi de dire que l'affaire Navalny empoisonne la situation russe et mine sa crédibilité. Cette affaire n'est toutefois pas le seul facteur. Nous avons évoqué hier la mise en œuvre des arrêts de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme et tout à l'heure, nous évoquerons le rétrécissement continu des capacités d'action des ONG en Russie. La Russie a adhéré à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, elle est membre du Conseil de l'Europe et nous savons ici combien les débats relatifs à la réintégration de la délégation russe au sein de notre Assemblée ont été vifs. La contestation des pouvoirs de la délégation russe pour motif substantiel, qui sera examinée demain, le démontre une nouvelle fois. La Russie ne peut jouer avec le Conseil de l'Europe. La Russie ne peut jouer avec notre Assemblée. Il n'y a pas d'adhésion à la carte aux valeurs du Conseil de l'Europe. Les droits de l'homme représentent un tout et j'appelle avec force la Russie à respecter ses engagements. Je souhaite que le rapport confié à notre collègue Jacques Maire permette de faire la lumière sur l'empoisonnement d'Alexei Navalny, mais dès maintenant, j'appelle la Russie à le libérer, lui ainsi que toutes les personnes arrêtées arbitrairement à l'occasion de son retour. Je déplore l'attitude de la Russie dans cette affaire et je crois sincèrement qu'elle appelle une réaction de notre part, même si je souhaite, dans l'intérêt de la population russe, que la Russie continue à participer aux travaux de notre Assemblée. Je souhaiterais donc proposer demain des amendements afin que nous ayons une réaction proportionnée et adaptée à ces enjeux qui sont lourds. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Mularczyk de Pologne.
Thank you, Madam President, dear colleagues. Alexei Navalny is the main political prisoner of the Europe at the moment. He's a great hope for Russian people and a big swear word for Putin's regime. At the same time, if he will be released, the Russians become a great chance to change their country. Russia without bloody regime means safer and more sustainable Europe. But until Russia becomes a democratic country, we should agree on a common rules between all the democratic European countries. No investments, no continuation on pending projects like Nord Stream 2, no new gas, no new oil project with Russian state-owned company. Money from our expenditures will be for 100% stolen, or alternatively spent for new weapons or new war. I do appeal to the French members of our assembly, to our colleagues from France. We do not a clear statement from Yves Rocher company, whose business in Russia gave rise to criminal allegation against Alexei Navalny and his brother. Please make it clear that all the allegations against them are unjustified. French government should support Yves Rocher not to being hesitated to admit the truth. No continuation on the pending projects. Thank you, Ms. Chairman, and thank you, dear colleagues.
Merci, monsieur. Je donne maintenant la parole à monsieur Slutsky de la Fédération de la Russie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, chers collègues, cher monsieur maire, vous êtes avocat professionnel et vous êtes obligé d'être ici, à l'Assemblée parlementaire du Conseil de l'Europe, être avocat de vérité. Дорогие коллеги, я продолжу по-русски. И здесь нам господин мэр только что сказал, что задержание господина Навального не вписывается в стандарты Совета Европы. В стандарты Совета Европы не вписывается ложь, которую нам сегодня, к сожалению, дают многие ораторы в этом зале. Господин Навальный не был отравлен веществом «Новичок». 15 вопросов было в письме Генеральной прокуратуры России, и ни один вопрос, к сожалению, не получил своего ответа. Мы получили расплывчатый ответ на один из 15 вопросов. Нет никакого юридического заключения. И если бы Навальный был отравлен нервно-паралитическим газом, любым военным отравляющим веществом, происходящим из России, дорогие коллеги, здесь бы уже были тонны бумаг. Но Германия ничего нам не ответила. Нет никаких оснований. Есть только попытки деформировать образ России в этом зале. И против этого мы выступали и будем выступать в Совете Европы. И я парадоксальным образом согласен с Елизаветой Ясько. Мы должны бороться за будущую Европу. Европа, которая основана на реальных правах человека, на реальном верховенстве закона и на правде, а не на домыслах. Поэтому, пожалуйста, германские власти могут дать нам ответ, и тогда мы можем говорить об отравлении, но пока нет никакого отравления, а есть спасение господина Навального. И только будучи спасенным омскими врачами, в Российской Федерации, ввиду экстренной остановки самолета, Навальный получил возможность жить, встречаться с господином мэром в Берлине, подавать жалобы в Европейский суд по правам человека. Он спасен, а не отравлен в Российской Федерации. Мы должны говорить правду. И вопиющим нарушением правил и регламента наших традиций является рассмотрение в комиссии по юридическим вопросам и правам человека назначения докладчика по кейсу Навального, а этого доклада нет, это решение не принималось нашим бюро. Спасибо.
Monsieur Slutsky, il aurait fallu que vous gardiez votre masque, c'est important. Je demande d'ailleurs à tout le monde de penser à garder le masque, même lorsqu'on parle. C'est le protocole, c'est la condition sine qua non pour qu'on puisse tenir cette séance dans de bonnes conditions et qu'on puisse rester en hybride. Je vous remercie. Bon, je donne maintenant la parole à Monsieur Meresco d'Ukraine, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, Alexei Navalny's case is not only about a concrete person. It is rather about basic values and principles of our organization, which is supposed to defend human rights and which strives to establish rule of law. Therefore, demanding immediate release of Alexei Navalny and his supporters, we defend human rights, values, and principles of the Council of Europe. But let's take a closer look at the Navalny's case and try to understand its true meaning. Isn't it truly amazing that one of the leaders of Russian opposition, one of the most vocal critics of the Russian corrupt regime, who was poisoned allegedly by the Secret Service of the regime and who narrowly escaped death, was immediately detained and arrested upon his arrival to Moscow? As we can see, instead of unbiased and objective investigation of the suspicious circumstances under which Navalny had been poisoned, he encountered detention and arrest. This move by the Russian authorities in itself can indicate that there is a link between Navalny's poisoning and the Russian authorities. At the same time, the Navalny's arrest looks like a vendetta against Navalny on the part of the Russian authorities. Additionally, Navalny's arrest is a quite clear signal sent by the Russian authorities to the community of democratic states, signifying that Russia feels total impunity and absolutely doesn't care about world opinion and our organization's concern over human rights situation in Russia. Dear colleagues, the truth is that Navalny's case is not an masterminded and conducts this policy against opposition, Alexei Navalny is guilty. He is guilty of having survived the poisoning and continuing his struggle against corrupt regime in Russia. And it is for this reason he was detained and arrested. And not only he, but also his supporters and followers. That is why we demand immediate release of Alexei Navalny and bringing to justice all those involved in the poisoning and illegal arrest of Alexei Navalny. Thank you.
Merci, messieurs. Je donne maintenant la parole à Madame Andrikienė de Lituanie. C'est à vous, Madame.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I ask you to recall some well-known Russian names: Andrei Sakharov, Sergei Magnitsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Boris Nemtsov, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Alexei Navalny. What they span: a well-known academician, a lawyer, a businessman, a politician, a journalist, an activist. What do they have in common? What unites them is a dream, a desire, and their fight for democratic Russia, where the rule of law prevails and human dignity is respected. But they have in common something more. In Russia, they experienced harassment, intimidations, arrests, prison sentences, poisoning, and 2 of them were murdered in Russia. Alexei Navalny is the one who is still in Russia, who is young and strong, who is fighting for democratic Russia against corruption and impunity in his country. He deserves our understanding and support. Alexei Navalny should be free. Colleagues, a week ago, Navalny was not allowed to address the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights of our Assembly. At the same time, when the Russian parliamentary delegation has recently been allowed to return to PACE. The life of Alexei Navalny is in danger. We see brutal attempts to silence him. It is high time we call on the Russian authorities to put an end to the harassment, intimidation, violence, and repression of independent and dissident voices, to end the impunity in Russia, which has already led to the loss of lives of many journalists, human rights defenders, and opposition politicians. We should do everything possible that instead they are able to their activities without fear for their lives. Recent developments in Russia, the detention of Alexei Navalny, the Novichok survivor, the brutal force used against peaceful demonstrators in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, Chita, and many other places in Russia on Saturday, 3,500 arrested, as well as many other facts we have witnessed in recent days and months, are beyond any acceptable limits. They cross all red lines, showing complete ignorance by the Russian leadership of its international commitments in the field of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, not to mention serious violations by Russia of international treaties on chemical weapons. It is absolutely a must for the Council of Europe, our Parliamentary Assembly, to condemn in the strongest possible terms the behavior of the Russian Federation, which is inappropriate for a member of the Council of Europe. We shouldn't shy away from our responsibility and our mission to defend human rights, to promote democracy and the rule of law in Russia also. Thank you.
Merci à vous. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Cox des Pays-Bas.
Thank you, Madam President. I hear several colleagues say this is not a debate on Navalny, but on much more. But I want to disagree. This is a debate on the arrest of Alexei Navalny. That's the title of the debate. And Mr. Navalny deserves this debate because he has been arrested for political reasons. And that is subject of this debate. Madam President, most of us in this assembly do not have close relations to Alexei Navalny. Only few, I assume, do know him in person. And most of us only do know a very small part of his political position. I think we know that Mr. Navalny considers himself as a political opponent of Russian President Putin and the Russian establishment. And that draws our attention also in Russia, but especially outside Russia. Best known is, of course, Navalny's fight against widespread corruption in our biggest member state. I do admire him for that crusade against corruption, as I do admire others elsewhere in Europe. But I do not share many other positions of Mr. Navalny. I do not share his opinion that Crimea is Russian and will never be given back to Ukraine. I think that's against our position in international law. I do not agree with his position with regard to illegal migrants in Russia. I think what he proposes is far too harsh. I do not agree with his nationalist points of view. I'm a socialist, I'm not a nationalist. But as our colleague Frank Schwabe said, it does not matter what the political ideas of Mr. Navalny are, whether he's a hero, a villain, an opportunist, a populist, whatever. He is a politician. He is a political activist, and for me, it's clear that he has been arrested time and again because of his political positions. And that is, ladies and gentlemen, what we should defend, not what he is thinking about, what his opinion is. We are here all entitled to be here, and Navalny should be entitled to participate in the political process in Russia. And here I want to say to our Russian colleagues that it would be better if they would not defend the position of their government, but defend the right of a politician with whom you can agree or disagree, but the right of a politician to say whatever he or she wants. That is what that should unite us. I think that we here always should confirm that you should not put politicians in prisons, but they should be in parliaments and they should be in the public debate. Therefore, my group of the Unified European Left demands the release of Navalny in line with verdicts of the court. That should be the case. That should be the subject of this debate. And here we should concentrate. Navalny deserves that. Thank you very much.
Merci, monsieur. Je donne la parole à monsieur Berthold du Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, chers collègues parlementaires. Je tiens à vous remercier de me permettre de participer à ce débat d'actualité sur l'arrestation et la détention d'Alexei Navalny. Samedi dernier, des milliers de personnes sont descendues dans les rues de dizaines de villes russes pour réclamer la libération d'un homme qui a tout risqué pour voir la démocratie s'épanouir réellement en Russie. Rien qu'à Moscou, on estime qu'il y avait au-delà de 20 000 personnes. On le sait, il y a eu aussi des milliers d'arrestations qui ont suivi cette manifestation. Un cynique pourrait dire que l'histoire, malheureusement, se répète. Il citerait la longue liste des militants assassinés tels que Boris Nemtsov, Anna Politkovskaya et Sergueï Magnitsky, qui ont lutté pour la démocratie en Russie et contre la corruption, ainsi que les manifestations précédentes au cours des dernières années. Mais j'ai l'impression que les choses sont en train de changer actuellement en Russie. Après avoir survécu à une tentative d'empoisonnement, M. Navalny semble avoir exposé ses agresseurs au sein du Service fédéral de sécurité de la Fédération de Russie et il a partagé cette révélation avec le monde entier. Par la suite, tout en sachant qu'il serait détenu, il est retourné en Russie. Mais il a d'abord produit une vidéo exposant la corruption généralisée au pays qui a été publiée après sa détention. Il y a quelques jours, cette vidéo de près de 2 heures affichait déjà plus de 36 millions de vues sur la chaîne YouTube. Cette histoire, vous en conviendrez avec moi, est digne d'un scénario hollywoodien. Et c'est facile à comprendre comment le courage, l'audace et l'intelligence de M. Navalny ont inspiré le peuple à attendre davantage de leurs dirigeants. Bien que je demeure optimiste, je n'oserais pas prédire comment cette histoire va se terminer. Le chemin vers une véritable démocratie digne de ce nom n'est certainement pas droit. Il y a des pas en avant et souvent plusieurs pas en arrière. Toutefois, comme l'a dit Martin Luther King, l'arc de l'univers moral est long, mais il penche vers la justice. Les Russes ne sont pas les seuls à vouloir un pays juste. Le monde observe la situation de près. Le monde surveille aussi ce qui se passe actuellement en Chine. Et j'ose espérer que le génocide des musulmans ouïghours fera aussi l'objet d'une reconnaissance en Europe. Je pense que les parlementaires du monde entier doivent prendre la parole pour dénoncer les gestes abusifs des dirigeants qui bafouent la démocratie et les libertés individuelles. Je salue la proposition de M. Jacques Maire de référer cette pénible situation à la commission juridique. Merci.
Merci, monsieur. La parole est maintenant à monsieur Bashkin, pour la Fédération de Russie.
Уважаемые коллеги, противоречивые реакции в вопросе задержания Навального связаны с тем, что в Европе по этой ситуации слишком мало объективной информации. А недостаток информации, как известно, порождает ложь и заблуждение. И тут моя задача терпеливо, подробно и с уважением разъяснить, что же происходит на самом деле. В России, как в других странах, гражданам, осужденным за нетяжкие преступления, закон позволяет заменить тюремное заключение на свободу. Но для этого необходимо взять на себя обязательства по выполнению определенных условий. Например, отмечаться 2 раза в месяц у пенитенциарного инспектора. Гражданин может отказаться и остаться в тюрьме, но обычно все соглашаются. Существуют ситуации, когда гражданин не в состоянии выполнить эти условия. Например, это нахождение в больнице. Но после выписки и выздоровления гражданин обязан вернуться к исполнению предписанных судом обязанностей. Господин Навальный, как осужденный по не очень тяжелой статье, не оспоренной, кстати, в ЕСПЧ, в 2017 году получил предусмотренную законом замену тюремного заключения на свободу с условиями. Известно, что он посещал пенитенциарного инспектора. Последний раз он был у него 3 августа. За время лечения в Германии претензий к нему со стороны правоохранительных органов России не было. Но давайте посмотрим на то, что произошло дальше с юридической точки зрения, без эмоций и без политики. Выписали его из больницы 22 сентября. Но как политик, оппозиционный политик, настроенный на усиление конфронтации с властью, он не поехал домой. Через месяц, 27 ноября, в России против Навального было возбуждено разыскное дело. Но и после этого он в Россию не вернулся. Еще через месяц, 29 декабря, российская система исполнения наказания обвинила его в уклонении от исполнения обязанностей и пригрозила возможным арестом. И после этого он не стал возвращаться. И только после того, как было объявлено, что решено его задержать, он решил, что теперь уже можно возвращаться в Россию. У многих возникло подозрение намеренного ожидания наступления юридических оснований для ареста. Коллеги, ультимативные требования к России, связанные с Навальным, как ни странно, противоречат основным принципам Совета Европы. Первый – это верховенство закона. Закон одинаков для всех, для политиков и безработных, для мужчин и для женщин, для членов ассамблеи парламентской, но и для Навального тоже. Второй принцип это независимость судов. Ни в одной стране мира суд не принимает решения по требованию власти или по требованию иностранных политиков. Что будет с господином Навальным дальше? Будет он освобожден или останется в тюрьме? Это будет решать 2 февраля российский суд. На таких же условиях, как и в отношении любого из 15 тысяч аналогичных нарушителей, которые появились в прошлом году. Большое спасибо за внимание.
Merci, monsieur. Je donne la parole à monsieur Valigny, de France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mes chers collègues, la raison d'être du Conseil de l'Europe est la défense de la démocratie, de l'état de droit et des droits de l'homme. Or, avec cette nouvelle affaire Navalny, la Russie montre qu'elle bafoue la démocratie, qu'elle ignore l'état de droit et qu'elle piétine les droits de l'homme. Alors, devant ce constat, la Russie peut-elle encore rester membre du Conseil de l'Europe? C'est une question difficile, mais c'est une question incontournable que nous devons avoir la lucidité de nous poser à nouveau. Je vous remercie.
Merci, monsieur. La parole est à madame Skaud de Norvège.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you. I really hope to be back in Strasbourg physically. But first of all, let me underline the importance of this debate. We are discussing the arrest and detention of Mr. Alexei Navalny. As an opposition party leader, he has been a target of the Russian regime. Their many efforts to silence him have not succeeded. However, this debate is about Navalny, but not only about Mr. Navalny. This is also a debate about freedom and expression and freedom of assembly and association. Article 10, freedom of expression, and Article 11, freedom of assembly and associations of the European Convention of Human Rights, are fundamental to political life and democracy. All member states of the Council of Europe have signed and ratified the convention. It is the very foundation of our organization. The principles, Madam President, and values enshrined in it must be the compass we navigate by. We are all subject to the Strasbourg court. We have all had cases before it, and we have been convicted. As a rule, we try to learn from our mistakes, revise our laws and practices. We try to avoid being taken to court again, and we do our utmost to have open and pluralistic democracies. Sadly, this does not seem to be true for all member states. In August last year, the disturbing news of Russian opposition politicians Alexei Navalny being poisoned reached us. It was soon confirmed to be poisoning by Novichok. After treatment and recovery in Germany, Mr. Navalny returned to Russia in January, only to be arrested upon his return. Arrested for having failed to appear in court while being rated. Madam President, the case of Navalny shows clear disrespect for the Strasbourg court. He has won several cases against Russia. Russian authorities have repeatedly tried to silence Mr. Navalny and obstruct his participation in political life. Stifling political opposition is undemocratic. As an assembly, it is important that we support Mr. Navalny and speak up against his attackers. The report and the preparation by Mr. Mayor will be pertinent in this regard. Thank you, Madam President.
Merci, Madame Skau. Je donne la parole enfin à Monsieur Cotier de Suisse. C'est à vous.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, chers et chers collègues parlementaires. La sauvegarde de la démocratie est au cœur du Conseil de l'Europe. C'est pour défendre la démocratie et les libertés fondamentales que notre institution est née il y a plus de 70 ans. C'est sa raison d'être. La démocratie. La démocratie est exigeante. Elle exige notamment la pluralité des opinions, la contradiction, le débat, la liberté d'expression, de réunion et d'association, la libre formation de l'opinion, le droit de manifester pacifiquement, des élections libres et équitables. Elle exige tout cela, et même plus. Pas seulement une partie de cela. Si l'opposition est réduite au silence ou mise sous pression à travers des procédures judiciaires utilisées à des fins politiques, alors la démocratie est amoindrie. Cela vaut dans tous les pays que nous représentons. L'arrestation de M. Navalny est extrêmement préoccupante pour tous les défenseurs de la démocratie. Préoccupante parce que M. Navalny a été arrêté à son retour en Russie sur la base de décisions judiciaires préalables dont la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a déclaré qu'elle violait plusieurs dispositions de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Pas un tribunal politique, comme on l'a entendu ici ou là, la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, une institution centrale de notre organisation. Cette arrestation est extrêmement préoccupante parce qu'elle s'inscrit dans une logique de pression répétée sur les forces d'opposition. M. Navalny et ses proches, mais aussi des hommes et des femmes politiques, des journalistes, des ONG, des militants des droits de l'homme ou de simples citoyens qui par milliers manifestent pacifiquement pour leurs droits et pour la démocratie. Madame la Présidente, il est nécessaire de mener ce débat, c'est le rôle de notre Assemblée. Mais il faut plus, il faut poursuivre le dialogue qui a été relancé par notre Assemblée en 2019, un dialogue exigeant qui implique des responsabilités. Et il faut poursuivre les travaux en cours, notamment le rapport sur l'empoisonnement de M. Navalny mené par Jacques Maire. Et il faut aussi une analyse des événements actuels et donc un deuxième rapport. Et je soutiens les propositions qui ont été faites aujourd'hui en commission des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme. Et j'espère que le bureau ira dans ce sens. Car M. Tolstoï a raison et les autres collègues russes qui se sont exprimés, il faut débattre sur des faits. Et pour que les faits soient connus, il faut ces rapports et il faut que les rapporteurs aient accès aux informations et aux personnes et qu'ils puissent donc visiter le pays. Et puis, il faut maintenir la pression sur chaque pays du Conseil de l'Europe, dont la Fédération de Russie, pour que chacun respecte les obligations qu'il a acceptées en entrant au Conseil de l'Europe, y compris l'exécution des arrêts de la Cour.
Merci. Compte tenu de l'ordre du jour, je dois maintenant interrompre la liste des oratrices et orateurs. Les oratrices et orateurs inscrits qui, présents dans le débat ou connectés à distance, n'auraient pu s'exprimer peuvent, dans les 4 heures, transmettre leur intervention dactylographiée au service de la séance pour publication au compte-rendu, sous réserve que les orateurs connectés à distance puissent faire état de leur présence effective au moment où le débat sera clôturé. Cette transmission doit être effectuée par voie électronique. Je vous rappelle qu'à l'issue de ce débat d'actualité, l'Assemblée n'est pas appelée à voter. En tout cas, ce débat aura néanmoins permis un échange de vues intéressant entre les membres de l'Assemblée. Le Bureau peut, à un stade ultérieur, proposer que la question traitée soit renvoyée à la commission compétente pour rapport. L'ordre du jour appelle la présentation et la discussion du rapport de Mme Alexandra Louis, au nom de la Commission des questions juridiques et des droits de l'homme, intitulé « Restriction des activités des ONG dans les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe », c'est le document 15-025. Ce rapport sera présenté par le président de la Commission, M. Boris Cylevich. Sachant que nous devons lever la séance à 19h30, nous devrons interrompre notre débat vers 19h10 pour entendre la réplique de la Commission et procéder au vote sur les amendements et sur les projets de résolution et de recommandation. M. Cylevich dispose de 10 minutes pour la présentation du rapport et de 3 minutes pour répondre aux orateurs à la fin de la discussion générale. M. Cylevich, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam President, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, our rapporteur, Madam Alexandra Louis, cannot be with us today, so I will present the report instead of her. This report was adopted by the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights last December. 5 years ago, in January 2016, our Assembly already addressed the issue of inappropriate restrictions on NGO activities on the basis of a report by our former colleague, Mr. Yves Kruchten. In June 2018, we debated his second report on the subject. Therefore, the report I'm presenting to you today is a third report on the issue on restrictions on NGO activities and follows on from the Assembly resolutions adopted in June 2018. In that resolution, our chamber noted with concern that the space for civil society had narrowed in several Council of Europe member states, mainly as a result of restrictive laws on registration or funding, administrative harassment, and smear campaigns targeting certain NGOs and their activists. The Assembly called on Azerbaijan, the Russian Federation, Hungary, Turkey, Romania, and Ukraine to repeal or not adopt the restrictive laws and to comply with the recommendations of the Venice Commission. More than 2 years and a half after the adoption of that resolution, the space for civil society continues to shrink in several Council of Europe member states. This report focuses on the application of some controversial laws affecting civil society in Azerbaijan, the Russian Federation, Turkey, and Hungary. Compared to 2018, the legal situation has not changed, and the laws criticized by Council of Europe bodies, particularly those concerning access to funds from abroad, have not been repealed. Moreover, new restrictive laws have been adopted or are being adopted in other member states. In particular, bills similar to Hungarian legislation targeting NGOs receiving funding from abroad are being prepared in Bulgaria and Poland. In Greece, new regulations have been adopted on registration and certification requirements for NGOs working on asylum, migration, and social inclusion. The restrictive measures adopted by Council of Europe member states to combat the COVID-19 pandemic have a bad influence on the functioning of civil society. They jeopardize not only the rights to respect for freedom of assembly and association and freedom of expression of NGOs and their members, but also the right to privacy. Since the adoption of Madame Louis' report by the committee last December, new worrying developments have occurred. In Russia, last November, legislative amendments to several laws were tabled in the Duma and were recently adopted. They introduced new obligations to persons registered in the Register of Foreign Agents, including reporting obligations, and broadened the catalogue of NGOs and individuals who may be considered foreign agents, regardless of their nationality. The so-called foreign agents will now be prohibited from any form of participation in election campaigns, which obviously can also be implemented against independent election observation organizations. Following our committee's request, these amendments are now being examined by the Venice Commission. At the end of December, the Association of Schools of Political Studies of the Council of Europe has been placed on a list of undesirable organizations in the Russian Federation. In Turkey, a law on the prevention of financing of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction was recently passed by the National Assembly. This law contains a set of amendments to other laws, including the law on association. It will allow temporary suspensions of NGOs leaders facing terror-related investigations and their replacement by government-appointed trustees, as well as more controls imposed on NGOs' fundraising activities and donations from foreign countries. In the meantime, some states have adopted good practices to ensure an environment conducive to civil society activities, including by taking steps to improve its participation in public debate. For example, Romania and Ukraine have complied with the recommendations of the Venice Commission and have amended their controversial legislation on the reporting obligations on some NGOs and their members. In addition, over the past 2 years, the Council of Europe has placed greater emphasis on the need to protect civil society. For example, in November 2018, the Committee of Ministers adopted a recommendation on the need to strengthen the protection and promotion of space for civil society in Europe, and will consider its implementation 5 years after its adoption. Initiatives have also been taken to ensure better NGO participation in the work of the organization, following the statement of the Committee of Ministers on the need to strengthen civil society space, adopted in Helsinki on 17 May 2018. The Venice Commission and the NGO Law Council of the INGO Conference have prepared new recommendations on NGO legislation. In March 2019, the Venice Commission published its report on the funding of association, which addresses the issue of their foreign funding and contains important recommendations on the subject, particularly with regard to NGOs reporting and publication obligations. Last May, the Expert Council on NGO Law of the INGO Conference published its guidelines on protecting NGO work in support of refugees and other migrants. In conclusion, NGOs play a watchdog role in a democratic society, and it is deplorable that they cannot enjoy their freedoms. In view of the recent developments, it is proposed in the draft resolution that the Assembly call on the member states of the Council of Europe to respect the international law standards on the rights of freedom and of assembly, association, and expression, as well as the relevant recommendations of the Council of Europe, including those mentioned in the Venice Commission report on the funding of associations. NGOs should be able to seek, secure, and use financial resources of both domestic and foreign origin without suffering discrimination or encountering unjustified obstacles. States should repeal laws that do not comply with these standards and recommendations, refrain from adopting new ones that would jeopardize the space devolved to civil society, and refrain from any form of harassment against NGOs and smear campaigns aimed at them. The COVID-19 pandemic should not justify such restrictions. Moreover, states should also fully and rapidly implement the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights concerning violations of NGOs' right to freedom of association, like in the case of Turkish Noseksantis versus Greece, and other similar judgments concerning the refusal to register some associations. Other proposals are also included in the draft recommendation. The Committee of Ministers should fully implement its declaration adopted in Helsinki in May 2019. It could also establish an alert mechanism for receiving warnings of possible new restrictions on the right of association. Moreover, regular exchanges of views with NGOs working in the field of human rights protection should be organized, and these organizations should have an easy access to information on the Council of Europe, activities and events. Thank you, Madam President.
Merci, Monsieur Sivilic. Je donne maintenant la parole aux orateurs de groupe. Je commence avec Monsieur Coulet pour le groupe Adlé. Il faut demander la parole, Monsieur Coulet. Vous appuyez sur le bouton en bas à gauche. Je vais prendre quelqu'un d'autre. Bon, alors en attendant, on va prendre Monsieur Goncharenko pour le groupe des conservateurs. Je vous ai surprise là.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Dear colleagues, now we're discussing an extremely important question about non-government organizations. And now we really finally have a possibility to do something for Russian citizens. Because when we are told that let's do something for Russian citizens, giving a possibility to representatives of Russian authorities, for example, to be here without any sanctions, it's not really work for Russian citizens. When we are saying that we're doing something for Russian citizens, when we give the possibility to Putin's regime to show some legitimacy, that's not a help to Russian citizens. Because real help to Russian citizens is when we are fighting for their rights, for their human rights. One of their rights is to have non-governmental organizations and to work in this area. But you know that in Russian Federation there is a legislation about foreign agents. Everybody who receives any money from abroad are foreign agents. Even more, at the beginning they did it for NGOs, but a month ago, in last December, they adopted law that just physical person could be a foreign agent. It's like in Stalin time, you could be the enemy of people. There was the name, the enemy of people, the families of enemy of people, and millions of people were killed like enemies of the state, enemies of the Soviet people. And their families were put to jail and they suffered strongly from this. And now they have absolutely same situation when they have in the Russian Federation legislation, which is Putin, which Putin uses just to fight with those who are not supporting him, not supporting what he is doing with his own country. I already mentioned today that, for example, last story, it's more than 100 million views on YouTube, story about his palace on the Black Sea shore. I just invite all of you colleagues to watch it and to see how crazy is this dictator and one of the biggest corruptioners in the world. So my proposition is, I just want to address all of you. Let's make sanctions against this Putin regime, and this will be the best help to 140 million Russian citizens who are suffering from this regime. Suffering. Yes, unfortunately, all millions of people in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, in other countries of the world suffering from this regime too. But Russians are suffering greatly too. And if we want to help them, do not give a legitimacy to his representatives here, but much better to work for their NGOs, for their civil society, for those who really can give Russia the future. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je crois que maintenant, M. Kuhle est en ligne pour le groupe ADLE.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, can I thank the rapporteur for her work regarding this important issue. The role of non-governmental organizations for a vivid civil society in all Council of Europe member states cannot be stressed enough. And the work of NGOs is nothing to be afraid of. Instead, governments and parliaments should encourage citizens to make use of their democratic rights to form NGOs and to work with such organizations. And let me be very clear regarding this issue. The possibility of NGO activities is not merely an additional feature in democratic societies and states. It has to be a core element in democratic societies of all Council of Europe member states. And when citizens make use of their rights, they are making use of their rights enshrined in the rules that we have given ourselves as an organization. Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights protect the right to freedom of association, of assembly, and of expression. And any citizen of a Council of Europe member state who wishes to participate in an NGO activity makes use of rights that we should commit to as an assembly today. And there's reason for that, because it is deeply concerning that in the Russian Federation, the so-called foreign agents law is used to obstruct the work of NGOs. It is deeply concerning that the situation of NGOs has even worsened in the last 2 years in Azerbaijan and in Turkey. And it is extremely worrying and concerning to which enormous extent activities of NGOs in Hungary are restricted in the context of the anti-Semitic and xenophobic campaigns against George Soros. Colleagues, this report, it contains some useful aspects. It contains proposals that we should consider in the following debate. And I want to especially mention that it provides that NGOs can seek, secure, and use financial and material resources of both domestic and foreign origin. I think we all agree that the state must be able to regulate contributions, financial contributions from abroad to political organizations. However, such regulation must not be misused to restrict the work of NGOs and it is worrying that Council of Europe member states label their legislation as to protect democracy from foreign influence when it in fact impedes democratic engagement and debates. Colleagues, I would like to stress that the work of NGOs causes us headache sometimes as parliamentarians. NGOs question what we do, they criticize what we say, sometimes they're not even grateful when we apply what they propose, but at the end of the day, in causing us headache, they are doing exactly what they are supposed to do. I thank you for your attention, and I wish us all a fruitful debate. Thank you.
Merci à vous. Je donne la parole maintenant à Monsieur Jalou pour le groupe la gauche unitaire. Pardon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There is no democracy without civil society, and it should be made clear that any repressive measures leading to a reduced or diminished democratic space for civil society is a violation of the rights to freedom of assembly, association, and expression embodied in Article 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights that we are all a party to. We have seen an increase in adoption of repressive laws created purposely for the prohibition by the authorities of any initiative that critically assess government policies or even deviate from them. As a result, the activities of NGOs, civil society, mass media, and active citizens is strongly restricted even further. We've seen people, NGOs accused of being foreign agents, repressive laws and legislations that would describe people as undesirable and as terrorist organizations. So there is a serious concern that civil society space continues to shrink in several Council of Europe member states, particularly in the case of NGOs working in the field of human rights. Madam Chair, it is of utmost concern to see how within our member states such as Turkey, in Poland, in Russia, in Hungary, in Azerbaijan, and even in France, how certain NGOs are subjected to smear campaigns and their activists suffer threats and reprisals. It should be a source of great concern that certain member states would go to a great length in stigmatizing civil society organizations by introducing restrictions, control, and surveillance without the basis of a reasonable suspicion that is founded on objective ground and criteria. Europe is increasingly concerned about international terrorism, and all acts of terrorism should be strongly condemned and any attempt to excuse terrorist attacks rejected, as they go completely against the spirit of and the standards and values enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. However, it should be underlined that combating terrorism and protecting Council of Europe standards and values are not contradictory, but complementary. It is extremely misleading to present the notion of human rights protection as being a conflict in conflict with national security concerns. Parliaments and governments of member states are therefore called upon to ensure the necessity and proportionality of measures taken in their fight against terrorism. We have also seen the increase in attacks on and criminalization of NGO assisting refugees and migrants on their donors. We must take the lead in condemning all regulations which make it more difficult for these NGOs to operate and the criminalization of its members. Madam Chair, the United European Left agree with the rapporteur. There is an urgent need for member states to strengthen the protection and the promotion of civil society space in Europe. We must always comply with international legal standards with regard to the rights of freedom and assembly, association, and expression. So I urge all member states to refrain from enacting legislation entailing unnecessary and disproportionate restrictions on NGOs' activities. Not even the COVID-19 pandemic should be used to justify the imposing of such restrictions. Some of us, I know, find it very difficult when we are scrutinized, when we are held accountable for our actions and the things that we do in Parliament as policymakers. But if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be in the kitchen. As policymakers, we become better when we are scrutinized. We become better when we are held accountable. And that is what democracy is about. Anything else is unacceptable. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne maintenant la parole à Madame Eva pour le groupe des socialistes.
Thank you, Madam President. Freedom of assembly is a fundamental right essential to the functioning of every healthy democracy. Non-governmental organizations or civil society in general are at the center of the right to freedom of assembly. Civil society is a mobilizing force of social development on all levels. The right of citizens to organize, to band together, to work on their ideals, on charity, on the progression of their political values or their deeply held religious views. NGOs can be formed about so many different things and so many different values, be it on issues that I would call social progress, or to fight against these very same movements of social progress in the name of conservatism or the often cited family values. Civil society has brought us tremendous social progress and value throughout the centuries. Think of the Red Cross and its invaluable work for prisoners of war, for survivors of catastrophes, and for the proliferation of international humanitarian law. And think of the enormous progress made by Amnesty International, fighting for the freedom of prisoners of conscience, the freedom of political prisoners all around the world. These are, of course, just some of the most notable examples on a global scale. And I believe that we can all recall domestic NGOs that have been agents of great social progress. I, for one, am extremely grateful for the Constitutional Society in my home country, Iceland. This is an NGO peacefully fighting for that the result of a national referendum deciding that the population of Iceland wants a new constitution, that this result of a national referendum be respected and that Iceland get a new constitution, which regrettably 8 years later still hasn't happened. But thanks to the Constitutional Society, this debate is held alive and the pressure is still on, and we still hope for the result of democratic elections in Iceland to be respected. Colleagues, what I'm getting at here is that civil society lies at the heart of a functioning democracy. Any attempts of governments of member states made to suffocate or restrict the free functioning of NGOs and civil society indicate a disease of the heart of democracy. It is therefore deeply saddening to me to find in this excellent report clear indications that several member states are using this global pandemic we are collectively experiencing to further choke the life out of their civil society. I put it to you that any government that fears their citizens, that attempts to crush their very human urges to band together and mobilize for change, cannot be considered a democratically minded government. Such governments consist of cowards, of people afraid of their own citizens, afraid to stand up for their decisions in a civil society. It is for this reason, Madam President, that I urge you all to adopt this excellent report. NGOs all over Europe need our unequivocal support for the betterment of their societies and for the betterment of the Council of Europe as a whole. I thank you for your attention.
Merci. Pour le groupe PPE, dernier orateur, Monsieur Muniama de Pologne, s'il vous plaît.
Madam President, dear colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the floor. And on behalf of the EPP, let me congratulate the rapporteur, Madam Alexandra Louis, for the great effort she rendered to prepare this important report indeed. It is disappointing and very sad to state that restrictions on NGOs' activities in the Council of Europe countries still prevail in some member countries. It is our duty actually to share the good practices adopted by some member states to offer an environment that is accommodating and conducive to civil society activities. These organizations are not our enemies. They are there to make the world a better place to live. It also be a must that we underline that the participation of NGOs in the work of the Assembly is an asset to reckon with indeed. Nevertheless, operations, or rather activities of NGOs are limited today due to three important elements. The first one is limited financial support, which is required. Second, the lack of flexibility of funders, just as we can see that there are some restrictions in the movement of resources from outside funders. Third, the lack of reliable information from government and, of course, the local governments as well. If these important elements are tackled brilliantly, then we could take a deep breath of relief on the functioning of NGOs in all member states. We are unfortunately aware in the EPP that legal solutions related to the COVID-19 pandemic significantly hinder the functioning of independent non-governmental organizations, but this shouldn't be a reason for fail. To conclude, it is important that NGOs enjoy their independence and base their commitment mainly on the principal due values they serve. The moment when the NGOs seek the government authorities, deny such values and fail to do so, it cannot remain silent. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je continue dans la discussion générale. J'appelle maintenant Lord Griffiths du Royaume-Uni. Il est là?
Voilà. First of all, let me say what a privilege it is to be speaking today. The very first time for me to speak at one of these meetings, although I've been a member for 8 months, during all of which the COVID pandemic has made it impossible for me to meet anybody. So I hope that I can focus my thoughts adequately on this occasion. I really want to congratulate those who have offered this splendid report and shown me in the documentation how this is the latest in a long line of attempts to define the role of NGOs, especially when it is focused on human rights, and to address the need to protect NGOs from attempts to limit or subvert their activities. We've heard adequate mention made of the things that worry us, the freedoms that we prize, and the determination we must muster in order to maintain the visibility and the effectiveness of NGOs in Europe at this time. The shrinking of civil society space is well documented, and it must be opposed. Describing and treating NGOs as foreign agents is too often a denial of the freedoms of civil society to hold governments to account, as we've already heard, and dismissing them as undesirable organizations when they focus on the failures of the state is, and we must say it, deplorable. So I find myself fully in support of this report and the amendments which seek to strengthen its recommendations. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and we must remain alert to the encroachment on the space occupied by civil society and defend civil society with our very existence. The Council of Europe simply must establish the conditions that pertain to the work of NGOs in order to fulfill all the requirements of the Convention and to be true to its values. Now, having said all of that, I've got one caveat to introduce. I've worked with a leading NGO. I've advised others. I've worked in a developing country that was described as a nation of 1,000 NGOs. As a worker in the field, I've sought the help of NGOs and refused help from some NGOs. For the simple fact is, there are undoubtedly some NGOs which need to be criticized. I would attest that there are indeed foreign agents which pose as NGOs. Some method of discerning and able to distinguish between the good and the bad would be a good corrective element to include in this report, perhaps in future work undertaken by those who do this work. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak. Sorry, I'm 11 seconds overdue. I promise I'll never do it again.
Merci, vous êtes tout pardonné. J'appelle maintenant Monsieur Umtig des Pays-Bas. Il est là? Il n'est pas là. Donc, on va passer la parole à Madame Olo, alors excusez-moi pour le terme, O'Loughlin d'Irlande. Il faudrait que vous demandiez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this excellent report. And firstly, can I commend the rapporteur for her work and, of course, the excellent amendments that are there. And I am inclined to agree with Lord Griffith with his point that maybe there should be some work in exploring the different types of NGOs and the type of value that they bring to our society, because it's important to discern the excellent work that is in the main done from those that are possibly rogue. Many of our member states, of course, have experienced shrinking civil space, and 2020 was particularly difficult because of restrictions placed on NGO activities because of COVID. And of course, that was the very necessary restrictions that government had to put in place. And, you know, many, of course, will have had their own funding cut and curtailed also. It's particularly concerning, though, that some countries have used COVID-19 as a pretext to curtail human rights and to restricting civil society space, thereby silencing NGOs who voice opposition ideology or agendas. And I just want to note that in many countries there are restrictions that have applied both online as well as offline, and that's certainly something in my country that we completely disagree with. Our own restraints in Ireland on movement and gatherings are necessary, temporary, and also they're very much in the context of the protection of public health. The rapporteur rightly and absolutely correctly highlighted specific concerns regarding restrictions on NGO activities in many member states and draws attention to the shrinking of civil society space in Azerbaijan, Hungary, Turkey and Russia. Of particularly concern in Russia and Hungary is the intense pressure on the LGBT community. In Russia, the gay propaganda law, which prevents any opinions being expressed that would support the LGBT community. So therefore, for example, pride marches, etc., are prevented. And in the recent 12 months, we've seen a lot of similar legislation being introduced in Hungary. Ireland as a country regularly expresses the importance of freedom of expression, and we've spoken about it internationally. NGOs must have their own independence to pursue fair and equitable goals, and we absolutely must defend their independence and autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam O'Loughlin. Now, as you see, the language and the face of the chair has changed. Good evening for everybody, or good afternoon, late afternoon already, depends where you are in Europe. The next speaker is Madam Inka Hopsu from Finland. Inka, the floor is yours, my country lady.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this important and timely report. NGOs are the cornerstone of a democratic society. Their role as generators and participants of the public debate is of vital importance. Exposing injustices and expressing the will of citizens through NGO activity is a major precondition for liberal democracies. As platforms of influence, the NGOs bring people together and contribute extensively to the inclusive democratic system. In addition, NGOs possess a lot of expertise, as their representatives are often experts in their own respective fields and capable of informing decision-making makers of complex, multidimensional political issues. In recent years, however, the role and operating environment of NGOs have changed in our member states. I am especially concerned by restrictive laws concerning registration requirements or receiving foreign funding, administrative harassment, and threats against NGO leaders and activists. Such practices must be condemned and properly addressed by this Assembly. The pandemic has further complicated the situation of many NGOs. Thus, we must be more vigilant and monitor the development of the situation in our respective countries. Mr. President, what worries me the most is restrictive regulations imposed on human rights activists and NGOs helping the most vulnerable people in our societies. As the report states, many countries have imposed new regulations on the registration and certification requirements for NGOs. In Greece, those are set for NGOs working in the areas of asylum, migration, and social inclusion. I understand that Greece has been under extreme pressure in recent years, but as members of the Council of Europe, we must always stand up for human rights. NGOs working in the field of asylum, migration, and social inclusion are doing very important work. They help people to integrate into new societies. NGOs also aim to ensure the legal protection of asylum seekers and bring injustices of the asylum processes into public debate. One aspect of this is the consultation of NGOs when developing new practices and regulations, such as the EU Migration Pact. Mr. President, as decision makers in the Council of Europe member states, we are obliged to ensure the respect for freedom of assembly, association, and expression. These values cannot be treated easily and lightly. All violations must be countered.
Thanks, Inga, for your speech and good timing. Next one is Mrs. Maria Medzentseva, Ukraine, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Chair. Thank you, dear neighbor. We have a report today which is called Restriction on NGO Activities in Council of Europe member states. I think the name can be renamed to the restriction on democracy in a very broader terms, because I can't agree more with the previous speakers that the right of freedom of association, along with the right of freedom to expression, opinion, and peaceful assembly is enshrined in all international documents which this Assembly voted on, enshrined in the human rights, enshrined in the core of our Assembly. Of course, it plays a vital role in controlling states, in controlling politics. Before becoming a member of parliament and a member of a city council, I was also working in an NGO. And as a person who practiced these activities, I can't agree more than depriving the right for NGOs of a fair access to funds, also international, which some countries who belong to this assembly are trying to implement in their national policies, are completely wrong. We cannot go on with this anymore. So many rights and bodies with the special procedures have to stop, because this will stop access to the fair information, to the development of the rules of law, to the development of European integration laws, and the effect of which will be very disappointing. Therefore, I would like to conclude and to make a remark that those who are trying to amend this good report are trying to amend the democracy of speech, the democracy in terms of cultural, economic, and other rights. I think this is absolutely unacceptable. The Council of Europe and the PACE, as an assembly representing 47 states of the subcontinent of Europe, should go along with a free and democratic activism, and the members of NGOs cannot be deprived from their rights to be absolutely independent. Thank you, dear Chair.
Thanks, Maria, for your speech. Now we move to the United Kingdom. Mrs. Kate Osamor, please, the floor is yours. She's on the line. Please try to open the line. If that's not possible, seems that's not be. No, we move further. Сейчас мы идем в Россию. Ирина Рукавишенкова, пожалуйста. Нет? Да, полис. Ну, пожалуйста. Ирина, пожалуйста.
Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие друзья, я не могу разделить восторженных отзывов об этом докладе предыдущих выступающих и очень сожалею о том, что работа над докладом прошла без учета многих важных документов, без глубокого погружения в проблему и особенности правового регулирования деятельности НПО в различных странах. К сожалению, в докладе отсутствует профессиональная юридическая оценка национального законодательства государств, в том числе России. Отсутствует необходимый в таких случаях сравнительно-правовой анализ. Думаю, мы имеем дело с ситуацией, когда слишком быстрая подготовка доклада, фактически за 2 месяца, нанесла существенный удар по его качеству. Нельзя делать выводы общеевропейского значения без проведения необходимых процедур. Напомню, что доклад был подготовлен без выездного мониторинга автора. Фактически мы имеем дело с вольной интерпретацией публикаций в интернет-источниках, использованием непроверенной и искаженной информации. К сожалению, из-за заочного формата общения и погрешности в работе связи полноценной дискуссии с автором на комитете, например, у меня лично не получилось, а письменные предложения практически не были приняты во внимание. Автор осуждает Российскую Федерацию за то, что некоторые неправительственные организации признаются нежелательными, и при этом не упоминает, что эти же НПО находятся в топ-листах других государств, например, Соединенных Штатов Америки, Франции, Великобритании и других. А следовательно, принятые в России решения обоснованные. Что это? Спешка, неглубокое погружение или двойные стандарты? Думаю, ни у кого нет сомнений в том, что на территории Российской Федерации должна применяться Европейская конвенция по правам человека, в том числе и положение о возможности введения ограничений в интересах национальной безопасности и общественного порядка в целях предотвращения беспорядков и преступлений. Таким образом, все выводы докладчика, сделанные в отношении Российской Федерации о применении избыточных или недемократических мер, являются надуманными и необоснованными. Спасибо.
Спасибо, Ирина, за доклад. Maintenant de France, Monsieur André Gattolin, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je souhaite tout d'abord féliciter et remercier notre collègue Alexandra Louis pour la qualité de son rapport. La résolution qui nous est proposée souligne à juste titre l'importance des ONG qui sont une composante essentielle pour une société civile ouverte et démocratique. Or, on constate malheureusement un recul de l'espace dévolu à la société civile dans plusieurs États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, à rebours de la déclaration d'Helsinki du 17 mai 2019. Cette déclaration reconnaissait précisément le rôle central des ONG et réclamait un dialogue sincère et transparent avec la société civile à tous les niveaux. La Convention européenne des droits de l'homme garantit le respect des droits à la liberté de réunion, d'association et d'expression. Les États partis à la Convention doivent donc les respecter et les assurer. Notre Assemblée a déjà pris position plusieurs fois sur des restrictions apportées aux activités des ONG en Europe, et le Conseil de l'Europe a publié plusieurs lignes directrices de référence sur le statut juridique des ONG ou encore sur la liberté d'association. Nos États doivent s'y référer et certains l'ont d'ailleurs fait récemment, comme le relève le rapport de notre collègue. Il est de la responsabilité de notre Assemblée de rappeler ces éléments avec vigueur. Je souhaite à ce stade insister sur un point qui me préoccupe plus particulièrement, celui des financements venant de l'étranger. Plusieurs États membres, en effet, imposent aux ONG recevant des fonds de l'étranger des obligations de rapport et de publication qui apparaissent excessives et qui visent essentiellement à les stigmatiser. Or, la capacité de solliciter, d'obtenir et d'utiliser des ressources financières et matérielles constitue un élément à part entière du droit à la liberté d'association. Sans cela, les ONG ne peuvent tout simplement pas exister ni mener leur action. Le rapport détaille des exemples préoccupants en Russie, en Turquie, en Azerbaïdjan et en Hongrie. Il cite également des initiatives inquiétantes, même si elles n'ont pas toutes abouti, en Ukraine, en Bulgarie, en Pologne ou encore en Roumanie et en Grèce. Je me félicite à cet égard que des amendements aux projets initiaux aient été apportés en Ukraine et en Roumanie afin de prendre en compte les recommandations de la Commission de Venise. Je ne critique pas en soi la demande de transparence lorsqu'elle est effectivement destinée à lutter contre le blanchiment d'argent ou contre le terrorisme. Mais prenons garde à la proportionnalité des exigences. Prenons garde à ce que cette préoccupation légitime ne soit pas utilisée comme un outil pour asphyxier la société civile et le débat public. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Kattolin. I understood that Madame Kate Osamor is on the line. Is that true? So, Madame Kate Osamor from the UK.
Thank you so much. I would like to congratulate the rapporteur, Alexandra Louis. I understand she's not here, and I thank her stand-in, Boris, for his work that he did for us all. I just want to start off by saying that NGOs are part of democracy, and we must not push them away from that discussion. They should be part of that discussion. And it's really important that we make sure that any NGO that is receiving funds is encouraged, and always, without a shadow of a doubt, is encouraged to record and to show every penny where it has been spent. And all NGOs which are run and are transparent and are accountable, they do this. So there is no question on, us really discussing whether or not an NGO should be part of democracy, because I believe it should be. And as I see, there is a growing problem across some member states who are adopting practices and legislation which is not in compliance with the Council of Europe standards. And we don't have much time, and I don't want to repeat what has been said previously. I must say I support the majority of colleagues who have spoken, but we must all be very mindful that COVID-19 has only exacerbated the seeping inequalities around society. And whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Greece, whether it's in Russia, COVID-19 has only exacerbated that. And government alone cannot reach all of us. When I say all of us, I mean reach society at large. We need NGOs to be able to pick up a lot of the work. We need NGOs to support organizations which maybe cannot now, because they are themselves are sick as individuals, they can't get to their clients. So we mustn't break up who is in charge and who's not in charge. We are all in charge of our democracy. We must all be fair. We must all work together. And this report, all I must say is I support it. I wish Alexandra was here to speak to it, but we must not fall back on our responsibilities. And any member state that feels that they can have repressive laws which impact on NGOs Those of us who are progressive, we must stand up, we must speak up, and we must support NGOs, because their work, without their work, many people would not even get food. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And now we are going to Azerbaijan. Mr. Samad Seidov, пожалуйста.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I agree with the previous speaker that NGOs is a part of democracy, and we are talking about democracy in this house of democracy. But could you imagine democracy without responsibility? That's impossible. We all are very responsible people in front of our constituency, in front of our electorate, in front of people who gave the votes for us. Only responsibility could create trust, and that's really very important. New era has come to not only Europe, to the rest of the world, the era of NGOs. And in this case, in some cases, we can see that we observe NGOs which are not so responsible. And that's why, first of all, we should think, how can we deal with that? What we should do in order to create more transparent approach to the NGO activities. As an information I want to give to this assembly, today the President of Azerbaijan has signed a special decree in order to facilitate the activities of NGOs via electronic communication between NGOs and Minister of Justice, which is really very great support to the NGOs. But the problems with NGOs have in the world not only limited with these 4 countries which mentioned in this report. That's not so fair. A lot of countries, a lot of NGOs in different countries, not only in the Council of Europe member states, have different problems. And when we can see in the report only 4 countries, it means this report is incomplete. And that's why, if we are talking about the real support to the NGOs, if we are talking about democracy, if we are talking what we should do in order to help people to create the new environment, we should think, how can we create responsible NGOs? How can people in Europe and in the rest of the world believe to the activities of the NGOs? And a very good example of that, for example, is the Red Cross. Very responsible organization, and everybody trusts to this organization. That's a vivid example of the real NGO. I hope we will be able to give our advice. How can we create trust and responsibility toward the NGOs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samad. Now I will ask Madam Petra Bayer from Austria. Please, the floor is yours.
Danke sehr, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich möchte vorwegschicken, meine eigenen politischen Wurzeln sind in der organisierten Zivilgesellschaft. Ich arbeite eng zusammen und viel zusammen mit vielen NGOs auf österreichischer, auf europäischer und internationaler Ebene und halte es für ausgesprochen befruchtend, sich inhaltlich auszutauschen, Meinungen auszutauschen, gerade dann, wenn man nicht immer der gleichen Meinung ist. Ich möchte aber auch nicht blauäugig sein. Ich bin davon überzeugt, dass es auch eine Dark Side of Civil Society gibt. Und damit meine ich all jene, die außerhalb des Wertekanons der EMRK stehen, die Rassismen schüren, die Menschenhass und Herrenmenschentum als Programm haben. Und für die, mag ich ganz klar sagen, für die bin ich keine Fürsprecherin, nicht im geringsten. Aber für jene, die auf der Seite von Menschenrechten, von Freiheit und von Gleichberechtigung stehen, die möchte ich wirklich als Partnerinnen und Partner verstanden wissen. Ich glaube, dass wir gut beraten sind, als Politik mit ihnen auch zusammenzuarbeiten. Deren Tätigkeit darf weder eingeschränkt, noch behindert, noch diskreditiert werden. Und Covid-19 ist öfter als Vorwand dafür verwendet worden, das Recht auf Privatleben, auf Freiheit der Meinungsäußerung, auf Versammlungs- oder Meinungsfreiheit einzuschränken, was nicht passieren darf, was wirklich nur dann passieren darf, wenn gesetzlich vorgeschrieben, wenn proportional und wenn dementsprechend in einer freien Gesellschaft notwendig. Also das ist viel, viel öfter passiert und das dürfen wir nicht zulassen, weil auch außerhalb der Pandemie erleben wir, dass der Platz für die organisierte und auch die nicht organisierte Zivilgesellschaft immer kleiner und kleiner wird. Und ich bin überzeugt, wir sind gut beraten, für mehr Platz für Zivilgesellschaft, für NGOs zu kämpfen, weil wenn wir das nicht tun, könnte es am Ende unter Umständen sein, dass auch unser Platz als Parlamente um einiges kleiner wird, als er das momentan ist. Danke sehr.
Danke schön, Petra. And now we will move to Hungary. Mr. Barnapal Zsigmond, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues,
good start, but please try again, Barnabal. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hybrid. Okay.
Is it okay?
Perfect.
Dear colleagues, Hungary recognizes the vital contribution of non-governmental organizations to the promotion of common values and goals. These organizations also play an important role not only in the democratic control of the government and shaping public opinion, but also in addressing certain social difficulties and fulfill other community policy needs. The Constitution of Hungary ensures that everyone shall have the right to establish or join organizations. Hungary ensures these rights to everyone without discrimination. Hungarian civil society is flourishing. In Hungary, there are more than 60,000 NGOs. Let me just recall what has happened in the last 2 years around this report. The work was started by Ms. Sotnik. She was succeeded by Lord Anderson. And after he left the assembly, Ms. Alexander Louise was appointed as rapporteur. Even though the committee decided on a fact-finding visit in Hungary, and I personally invited Ms. Sotnik, none of the persons involved in the writing of this report have had the time to come to Hungary to contact me or the Hungarian government or independent NGOs in Hungary, and still they are writing judgments. I consider that we should avoid this kind of superficial, unfounded, biased reports because the credibility of the Council of Europe bodies is at stake. Dear colleagues, hence there is a fundamental public interest in ensuring that society as a whole, as individual citizens, are aware of the interest these organizations represent. Furthermore, due to the more complex nature of transnational financial processes, there is a legitimate expectation to make it transparent who are the donors influencing the civil society organizations. These aims have been considered as legitimate by the Venice Commission. As far as the law in relation to measures against illegal migration is concerned, it shall be emphasized that the measures included therein were necessary to prevent or at least restrict illegal migration and the abuse of the asylum procedure. Let me just emphasize that during the past years, since the entering into force of the law, no NGO or a member thereof has been prosecuted on the basis of these provisions. The Act on NGOs does not prohibit funding from abroad and does not aggravate the operation of NGOs. It merely makes foreign funding transparent. In the report, there is no concrete evidence of harassing NGOs because of political reasons or political influence on NGOs. The rapporteur does not indicate any cases showing that the Hungarian government influenced the NGOs' independence. Everyone has to realize that there is a political debate of Hungary between the left financed by your fellow Hungarian Soros György and the right represented by the government party, the Fidesz. Mr. Soros is intensely involved in the Hungarian politics, and he is using for his interests, besides the political parties, some NGOs financed by him. It is important to know that among the 60,000 NGOs, when it comes to critics against Hungary, the Hungarian government you always find the same 30, 50 NGOs financed by Mr. Soros. As a conclusion, I consider that the critics on Hungary are of political nature rather than based on legal grounds. Therefore, I suggest to examine the facts and the Hungarian legal system more accurately. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnapal. I would have allowed you to actually 30 seconds more because there was clearly the connection problems at the beginning, but nice, you made it a good time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure actually to say that the next speaker is from Mexico, from Mexican Parliament. It's pleasant to have Dora Patricia Mercado Castro to speak to us. So I'm very pleased to offer the floor for you. What is the time in Mexico now?
Pongan ustedes para intervenir en el canal Flor.
Ya. Creo que no. ¿Me escucha ya bien, presidente?
Yes, we can.
Bueno, pues
Madam Mercado, if there's any other connection in the room, please switch off any other computer. It is also connected to the, then make your language selector on floor. Language selector on floor. On the left side of your screen. Not on Spanish, please, on floor.
No lo pongan en español.
Se oye un eco, ¿verdad?
Let's do Madam Dora Patricia Mercado Castro so that you will connect it, we will connect it a bit later. We have now a few other speakers, but we'll return back. And you must tell me what is the time in Mexico now. It will be interesting for us to know. It was too late. Okay. Now to Turkey, Mr. Tia Kunaldis, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for her effort in addressing this important issue. However, the report unfortunately inaccurately characterizes the legislation in Turkey on non-governmental organizations as restrictive. Turkey has a vibrant civil society where citizens can freely associate and engage in civic action. This is evident from the fact that the number of associations active in Turkey increased from 72,000 in 2000 to more than 121,000 in 2020. We do always believe and support NGOs are necessary, and they are taking very important activities and factoring for societies for their development. The report states that the association has been closed after the failed coup attempt of July 2016. Turkish authorities, with utmost respect to the rule of law, started proceeding solely against associations that have been suspected of being involved in illegal activities, such as aiding and abetting terrorist organizations. In addition, Article 11 points that this article does not prevent the imposition of lawful restriction on the exercise of the rights by members of the armed forces, of the police, of the administration of state. That's why we have been doing in accordance with what we have done in accordance to the law. In addition to these regulations and developments, my dear friends, the newly enacted law number 7262 on prevention of financing of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, we have done some amendments clarifying and expanding the scope of law association by removing confusion regarding the applicability of law over the foreign foundation. With this law, we also introduced new measures and created new capabilities in fight against the laundering of process and crime financing of terrorism. These regulations, which are all in line with international norms and law, will make the fight against money laundering and terror financing more efficient. And I would like to underline that NGOs and NGO activists who have nothing to do with these crimes will, of course, face no restrictions at all in our country, like any other country face. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much. Now we move to Armenia and Sos Avetisian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Today we are discussing an important report about the restrictions of NGOs in different countries. A cursory look at those countries will draw another map, a map of countries, some countries, which may have problems with democracy, the hate speech and xenophobia is state-sponsored, the independent media is shut down, they usually refuse to implement the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights. In other words, the civic space is curbed. In this context, I must mention that alongside with different state institutions, the international civil society organizations and independent international media have been raising questions when Azerbaijan and Turkey jointly launched an aggression against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. They documented in their media coverages, as well as in international human rights reports, about important facts that were to be discussed in this hemicycle if everything was normal. The human rights organizations, as well as international media, documented these issues of barbarism, the use of the phosphorus and other cluster bombs prohibited by the international law. They also reported about the mercenary terrorists pimped into the conflict by Turkey. However, these entire documentations sometimes are meeting the wall of silence and neutrality. All the questions discussed in this hemicycle maybe are relevant or important today. However, I don't think that any of this is more relevant or more important than the returning of Armenian POWs and other captive people, which again, if we had slightly more humanitarian orientation in this hemicycle, in this organization, would be the first matter of the day. The PACE has an institutional cooperation with the civil society organizations. However, often this protection of rights requires more actions from the states, and obviously less is expected from the civil society organizations in terms of creating public good. I think at times we need to learn from the courage of those civil society organizations which voice their frank opinion, even knowing very well that it might be very pragmatic for them. As a conclusion, it becomes more clear that when people's right to live independently with dignity is denied, the fact is not condemned, it will surely bring similar situation elsewhere. In this context, I want to drive your attention one more time for your parliaments and capitals alike, that seeds of negligence will not be good fruit. Lastly, the protection of vibrant civil society across the borders is certainly a way of ensuring of protection of human dignity when the member states fail to do so. So I commend this report, and I hope that we will work more with the independent civil society organizations and media alike. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jos. Now we try once again have the connections to Mexico. Dora Patricia Mercado Castro, do you have connections to us? Please try. And if you have, please tell the time in Mexico. We are curious to know at what time you are living.
¿Qué tal? Aquí todavía buenos días, presidente. Son las 11 de la mañana, 11:30. Les doy las buenas tardes a ustedes por allá. Y quiero iniciar haciendo mi reconocimiento a la ponente de este informe que pone en el centro la importancia de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil como pilares de un Estado de derecho en democracia y para la defensa de los derechos humanos. En nuestro país, México, tiene algo en común con los países europeos que comenzaron la transición a la democracia a fines de los 80. el papel central de la sociedad civil organizada en el diseño de un régimen abierto y comprometido con los derechos humanos. Nos preocupa que se impongan restricciones para que operen las organizaciones con el pretexto de proteger la seguridad nacional o evitar rebeliones violentas. En todos estos casos hay una tendencia común. Además de las medidas en cuestión, hay un discurso hostil desde el poder que revela el objetivo de silenciar las voces críticas acerca del desempeño de los gobiernos. El reporte que se presenta hoy concluye que hay una contracción del espacio de la sociedad civil en los países señalados. Nos preocupa que se pretenda cerrar caminos a la sociedad civil a través de lineamientos fiscales, financieros, migratorios más estrictos, con sanciones desproporcionadas. Recientemente, el relator especial sobre personas defensoras de la ONU llamó la atención sobre estas formas indirectas de criminalización. El derecho al acceso al financiamiento para las ONGs está reconocido en el artículo 13 de la Declaración sobre los Defensores de los Derechos Humanos de la ONU de 1998. Los derechos de asociación, participación y el derecho a la defensa de derechos están protegidos con tratados de la ONU, del espacio del Consejo de Europa y también en nuestro sistema interamericano. El caso de Hungría, que contiene el informe, me preocupa en particular. Se trata de una amplia campaña dirigida contra las organizaciones para la igualdad de género y la defensa de personas migrantes. Quiero recordarles que en México decenas de organizaciones dan refugio temporal y alimentos a miles de migrantes de Centroamérica en su camino a Estados Unidos. Merecen ser fortalecidas por su gran labor humanitaria. En una democracia plena debemos garantizar dar todo el apoyo a quienes asumen voluntariamente la tarea de promover los derechos humanos. Acompañamos el sentido de la recomendación y la resolución que reafirman al Consejo de Europa como un espacio para defender sociedades diversas en donde las personas migrantes, LGBTI y las mujeres gocen de los mismos derechos. Muchas gracias, presidente, y a todos.
Gracias, gracias. Now we'll go to France, s'il vous plaît, Madame Maria-Christine Dallot.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, Madame la rapporteure, je vous remercie pour le travail que vous avez accompli et je partage vos préoccupations au sujet des restrictions touchant les ONG au sein de plusieurs États membres du Conseil de l'Europe. Comme vous l'indiquez, non seulement certains pays, vous citez l'Azerbaïdjan, la Russie, la Turquie, continuent à appliquer des législations et des réglementations restrictives, mais d'autres États membres ont préparé des propositions de loi s'inspirant apparemment de ces législations restrictives. Vous citez notamment la Hongrie, la Roumanie, l'Ukraine et la Grèce. Cette tendance est préoccupante et il faut y mettre un frein. Une approche à la fois ferme sur les principes et pédagogique pourrait peut-être s'avérer efficace. Je vous rejoins tout à fait lorsque vous dites que la lutte contre le terrorisme, le blanchiment d'argent ou l'influence politique étrangère ne peut pas justifier l'instauration de restrictions allant à l'encontre de la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme et notamment à l'encontre des articles 10 et de l'article 11, selon lesquels les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe sont tenus de garantir le respect des droits à la liberté de réunion, d'association et d'expression. Je souhaite toutefois attirer votre attention sur le fait que certaines situations peuvent s'avérer délicates. En effet, il arrive que des ONG affichent un positionnement qui ne correspond pas véritablement à leurs actions ou soient instrumentalisées. Dans ces cas-là, les autorités ont le droit et même le devoir d'agir, mais elles ne peuvent le faire qu'en s'étant préalablement, scrupuleusement assurées du bien fondé et de la légalité de leur action. Cette tâche n'est pas aisée et je pense que le recours à l'expertise du Conseil de l'Europe que vous préconisez dans votre résolution point 9.6 est à cet égard tout à fait bienvenu. J'en viens enfin au contexte actuel particulier, qui à mes yeux nécessite une vigilance accrue. En effet, la pandémie de Covid-19 qui frappe le monde entier depuis un an place la santé publique au centre de toutes les préoccupations. Or, conformément à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, la santé publique, en tant que but légitime, peut justifier la restriction des droits au respect de la vie privée, article 8, à la liberté d'expression, article 10, et à la liberté d'association, article 11. Mais uniquement à la condition que cette restriction soit nécessaire, soit proportionnée et qu'elle soit prévue et encadrée par la loi. En France, nous avons adopté, le gouvernement a fait adopter la loi sur l'état d'urgence. Cette vigilance est d'autant plus nécessaire que le contexte épidémique fragilise particulièrement certaines catégories de la population habituellement soutenues par les ONG. Pour conclure, je vous remercie à nouveau pour le travail que vous avez effectué, qui me semble tout à fait nécessaire. Et bien sûr, je voterai la résolution et la recommandation que nous vous proposons. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Madame. And next one is Mr. Tony Lloyd from the UK. Oh, it's been it. I'm so sorry. Yes. And next one is from Azerbaijan, Mr. Rafael Huseynov.
Thank you, Chair, dear colleagues.
I'm sorry.
It is well-known truth that many NGOs operate in each of the participating countries, and the number of these organizations is constantly growing, as well as their scope of activity is expanding. Many of the problems are similar regardless of the country in which they operate. But of course, there are many differences depending on the country situation. Currently, the number of NGOs in my country, Azerbaijan, is about 4,500. However, due to the new historical conditions emerged in the country for the first time, the overwhelming majority of these structures have become closer to each other and are focused on working in one area. Since most of these NGOs wish to contribute in the same direction, the problems they face and will continue to face on a regular basis are essentially close. Azerbaijan emerged from a hard war and liberated its territories occupied for almost 30 years. Investigations are underway in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan, and the amount of damage is calculated. Both local and foreign observers, as well as individual NGOs representatives who had the opportunity to visit the area, confess with the pain in their hearts, and videos and photographs presented to the public demonstrate how terrible the landscape is. Now Azerbaijan is starting construction work in these territories to accommodate about 1 million refugees and IDPs. Majority of NGOs are determined to participate in these processes within their capabilities. The fact is that people who will be resettled in these areas are not accommodated in 60 districts and cities of Azerbaijan. Now, those people who have to return to their fatherland are in dire need of legal assistance. Tackling the countless issues from household problems to healthcare, education, and employment is a challenge ahead. There is so much work to be done in the post-war period of reconstruction that all the forces in the country are not involved in working together to achieve a common goal. It may take many years to resolve the problems. Issues of national importance today mobilize non-governmental organizations and government agencies, as well as international structures involved in these areas to work in closer cooperation and mutual support than ever before. In my opinion, this cooperation and experience gained during the extreme period of history will have a positive impact on the future of more effective NGO activities in Azerbaijan, the formation of more healthier relations with the authorities. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafael. Now, Tony Lloyd from the UK.
Thank you, Timo, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. Can I begin by saying this, that if the core function of the Council of Europe is to ensure that democracy, the rule of law and human rights are upheld, we can never allow the law to be put into contradiction with democracy. And it's fundamental to any kind of functioning democracy that there's the right to dissent, the right to challenge, the right to disagree. I can't think of how my work as a Member of Parliament in the United Kingdom could have operated over the years I've been a Member of Parliament had I not had the NGO community there, sometimes to advise, sometimes to educate, sometimes to help change my mind. That applies in areas like health, education, environmental concerns, raising those environmental concerns. But of course, actually, in terms of those areas that do challenge the government, to the governance and the decisions that we as politicians make. So it's a sad reflection that at the moment we do see in some of our Council of Europe states those the respect for the role of NGOs under threat. Of course, as other speakers have said, we can all point to those NGOs that we applaud and approve of. I had a meeting this week with the British Red Cross, part of the International Red Cross organisation, who doesn't respect the Red Cross. But of course, when the Red Cross are raising issues like the use of child soldiers by some regimes around the world, we immediately meet the denial by those governments that child soldiers are employed on their terrain. But we know it happens. So even the Red Cross, from time to time, has to raise issues which are unpalatable to national governments. And we've got to respect that. We can't accuse NGOs of irresponsibility when they're doing their role. We can disagree with them. There are NGOs in my country I profoundly do disagree with. But the rather sad thing for the Council of Europe, and for the PACE in particular, is the recognition that in this era, Mr. Chairman, that those nations of ours which are embracing a more authoritarian view of the world are the ones also that are trying to use the law to restrict the role of NGOs. The restrictions on the so-called anti-Soros laws in Hungary, very, very dangerous. The same in Turkey, Azerbaijan and Russia. And I've heard the defence from our colleagues from those countries today. I would say to them, go back to your governments, go back and challenge them to look again at the role of NGOs. NGOs improve governance. NGOs make our societies healthier and better and more democratic. Go back and say to your government, you need functioning and powerful NGOs. Thank you.
Tony, thanks very much. Now, Armenia, Vladimir Vardanian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to express the words of gratitude to the reporter for an excellent report. Ladies and gentlemen, NGOs they are part of our life, and pandemic made NGOs even more important in our daily life because we were very active in different aspects of combating coronavirus. And for sure, everybody understood from the legal perspective that NGOs are not free to do everything. We may be subject for certain limitations. It is quite normal until it's necessary for democratic society, until it is democratic as such, until these limitations are based on the law, and for sure until we are proportionate. We are speaking about discriminatory restrictions on NGOs, and unfortunately we have some particular countries where NGOs face such problems. Here we speak also about the responsibility. Yes, for sure, responsibility is quite important when we are speaking about the relations of states and NGOs. And this responsibility should be reciprocal. Yes, NGOs should be responsible, but states should be responsible too. My colleague from Azerbaijan, Mr. Saidov, said that at least there is, on Azerbaijani opinion, one responsible NGO in Azerbaijan. It's International Committee of the Red Cross. Mr. Saidov, whenever you ask ICRC, do they consider Azerbaijani authorities as responsible authorities? Plus, I would like to say that International Committee of the Red Cross is not just an NGO. It is an organization which more than 1.5 centuries are very active in solving and in protecting different victims of war. And when we are speaking about the ICRC, we should do not forget that it's not just an NGO, it's also a substitute of protecting power, and it has a Geneva mandate. And if we are speaking about the responsibility, I would like to say to my Azerbaijani colleagues, there is no need of adopting any other regulations. Geneva Convention, which are binding to Azerbaijan, and I know that, and I'm sure that International Committee of Red Cross raised this issue for a lot of times, stated clearly that after termination of hostilities, all the captives should be repatriated. Please, Mr. Saidov, please be responsible and please fulfill your international obligations. International obligations based not just only on the international statutory law, but international obligation which considered as erga omnes obligations. I hope that somehow, your country would become responsible on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vladimir, for your speech. You mentioned Azerbaijan in your speech, and the next one is Mr. Kamal Yafarodov from Azerbaijan. You can react, please.
Merci, Monsieur President. First of all, I would like to remind my colleague from Armenia, Marokyan, that it's not Shusha, its name is Shusha. When I the last time checked the entrance of it, it was written Shusha according to its historic form. And secondly, I fully agree with the President Rick Times when he said that this assembly should not be used as a tool for pursuing interest. Instead of, we should look inwards. We should try to protect, to defend, share the values of this assembly. Therefore, I kindly ask from my Armenian colleague that to refrain from this rhetoric, refrain from using every topic to politicize court issues, and to look forward, confidence-building measures. If an elected official of one state cannot find a common ground for confidence-building measures, how can we expect peace from an ordinary citizen in the region? The conflict is over. Now we have to look forward. We have to look for confidence-building measures. And regarding the reports, I have already mentioned this in the committee meeting that sometimes there are amendments which are the benefit of the report, but because of it tabled by one country has a conflict of interest with another country, it didn't get approved. For example, what is wrong that if we include here amendment that to research best practice of NGOs in Europe, because we can learn from the best practice. And regarding another amendment, First Amendment in paragraph 4, this report mentions 8 countries, but in draft resolution in paragraph 4, it refers only 3 countries. So from the professional point of view, either we mention all the 8 countries or remove all of them. That will be objective. Therefore, I ask from my all colleagues here that to support Amendment 1. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Now we have Caucasian speeches from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Givi Mikanadze. He doesn't seem to be in the room, so we cannot continue with the Caucasian debate. We move next door almost, Ukraine. Mrs. Yulia Obushunkinova.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, thank you very much for this excellent report. The role of non-governmental organization in the development of open and democratic society, adherence to the rule of law and protection of human rights, which goes beyond national borders. The resolution is aimed at ensuring freedoms of assembly, association, and expression, and raising awareness on violations of this fundamental principle. Ukraine adherence to the international legal standards and respect rights of freedom of assembly, association, and expression. The Ukraine legislation, in particular national strategy of the development of civil society for 2016-2020 and monitoring report provides solid background for the development and activity of NGO on Ukraine in compliance with all Council of Europe resolution in the regard. But at the same time, we would like to raise the issue of how to prevent using NGOs as instrument of hybrid war, how to protect NGOs as instrument, but at the same time, we do all the best in order to do for these rules. The Assembly should claim that the NGO must respect for their national law and culture of communication and standards of particular democracy. NGOs have to follow the principle defined in the recommendation of the Committee of Ministers to member states on the legal status of non-governmental organization in Europe: accountability, transparency, supervision, liability, and act according to the Code of Ethics and Conduct of NGO. I hope this resolution could protect the rights of World Congress of Ukrainians in the Russian Federation. Also, such organization in Prague, civil society and center and association of schools of political studies. The report points out that despite the relevant guidelines adopted with the Council of Europe on the activities of non-governmental organizations, we need to stress that it's against the international law and democracy itself that fully recognize the rights of national minorities, which cannot be compared by the criminal of terrorists or announced foreign agents on the grounds basis. NGO cannot be used as an instrument of weapon for the hybrid war. And the Assembly should promote good practices and integrity of the NGOs if they work in the protection of human rights. So, by the way, I also was a leader of NGO in Donbass. I know about the situation. Yes, I'm an internal displaced person, but we all do all the best in Ukraine and in other European country in order to be peaceful, in order to be peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. The next speaker is from your country, Lesia Vasylenko, but she doesn't seem to be here. No, she's not. Okay, we move further. Turkey, Mr. Mehmet Mehdi Eker. Who? Oh, Vasylenko, you are on the line. Please, then the floor is yours. Good, you are there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you also for the rapporteur who has so carefully put together this report. In fact, the role of NGOs is crucial in protecting fundamental values of the Council of Europe, such as democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. And just like free press and independent courts, civil society organizations are the ones shedding light on violations that are often committed by respective national governments and imparting opinions alternative to those supported by the ruling majority. And silencing these watchdogs for political reasons is absolutely unacceptable in states that are committed to Council of Europe values. But this, unfortunately, remains a common practice for certain members of this organization. A perfect illustration of politically motivated violation of freedom of expression and association is the Russian Federation and how it interferes in the activities of the Ukrainian World Congress, an NGO that works throughout the world, but also in the territory of the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian World Congress is the international coordinating body for Ukrainian communities in the diaspora. It represents the interests of 20 million Ukrainians and has a network of member organizations in more than 60 countries, including Russia. It is a recognized NGO by the United Nations Economic and Social Council and the Council of Europe. In July 2019, Russia's Prosecutor General Office and Ministry of Justice branded the activities of the Ukrainian World Congress as undesirable on the territory of the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian World Congress is contesting these government decisions before Russian courts, arguing that it has defended in a completely lawful and peaceful manner the fundamental principle of the territory of Ukraine and territorial integration of Ukraine and the human rights of Ukrainians. and that it has called on the international community to support such defense and condemned Russia's violations of its international obligations. But Russia's first instance and appellate courts have to date dismissed applications of the NGO and simply reiterated the position of Russia's governing authorities with no real analysis of the evidence submitted. On 18th July 2019, the European Parliament adopted a resolution protesting the decision of Russia's Prosecutor General Office declaring the activities of the Ukrainian World Congress undesirable on the territory of the Russian Federation. And I am calling on the Assembly today to stand in defense of international and domestic NGOs suffering from similar unlawful interferences by the Council of Europe member states, and in particular one, the Russian Federation. Silencing independent NGOs is another example of Russia's openly and blatantly disregarding its international obligations stemming from its membership in the Council of Europe. The Council must strengthen its accountability mechanisms against violators of its fundamental values, because one of the reasons for such violations and for their continuance is the occurring in the organization is the behavior of such countries, which is recurring all the time. Thank you
very much. Sorry to interrupt. The time is really against us. It's so much against us that we do have the time constraint the whole meeting. And now I will allow the last speaker from the list. Unfortunately, there's still few other people, but I couldn't continue. So the last one is from Turkey, Mr. Mehmet Mehdi Eker, please.
Thank you, President. NGOs are fundamental to a properly functioning democracy. They help to educate the public about what governments are doing and how it can affect them. NGOs would be more effective in communicating with politicians and public agencies because when many people speak with one voice, it is easier to be heard. Therefore, I would like to thank the rapporteur for addressing this highly important issue for all Europeans. In the report, Turkey is portrayed as a country which unnecessarily restricts the activities of the NGOs. I cannot agree with the rapporteur in this mischaracterization. The right to association in Turkey is guaranteed by the Constitution and other relevant laws. The number and activities of the association in Turkey has witnessed an increase in the last decade. This could solely be the result of a friendly legal and political climate for the NGOs. Unfortunately, recent various legislative changes the NGOs has been misinterpreted as unvalid restrictions. For example, the newly introduced responsibility for the associations to inform the state agencies about changes in their memberships has been the target of unfounded criticism. This new obligation for the NGOs was a result of practical concerns. In practice, there were cases in which individuals were registered as members of associations without their consent, or those whose membership was not removed from the records of the association despite their resignation from the association. Furthermore, it is necessary to know the current number of members of associations for declaring them of public benefit. In this context, it is difficult to understand how requiring NGOs to inform the public authorities about their members could be perceived as a restriction. As members of PACE, I believe it is our duty to ensure that NGOs could work in our countries without unnecessary restrictions. I believe this report is a step in the right direction, but it should avoid from mischaracterizing the developments in member states. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would say thank you very much for everybody who addressed to this session. Unfortunately, I must now interrupt the list of the speakers. There were still 7 members on the speakers list who were not able to speak, but they do have an opportunity to give their speeches to table office for publication in the official report if they so wish. The texts are to be submitted in typescript format not later than 4 hours from this moment. Now we move to the end part of the session. First, Mr. Šilevich, do you wish to reply? You have 3 minutes if you so wish.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I would like to express my sincere gratitude also on behalf of the rapporteur to all those who took part in this debate. And let me be quite plain. I understand frustrating of some members, particularly from those states which are particularly criticized in this report. It is unpleasant, of course, but in all this, and I understand this willingness to somehow put into question the professionalism and validity of the rapporteur's conclusions, but I haven't heard a single indication of any mistake or inaccuracy in the report. And if you want to defend your state, your legislation, your practice, please come up with serious arguments. But generally, I cannot agree more with what Tony Lloyd said. Go to your governments and talk to your governments to fix these problems. It's in modern world, it's impossible to conceal some drawbacks. The world, the Europe, the Council of Europe will see them. So in order not to be criticized, just fix your problems at home. This is the best way to defend the reputation of your countries. Yes, it's true that according to the European Convention, a state has a legitimate right to put certain restrictions on the freedom of association, freedom of expression, and so on. But this doesn't mean that these restrictions can be put arbitrarily. It's not enough to say that we believe that your NGO acts against the interest of the state, it's in breach with national security and so on. No, it must be proven. You must prove this in court, and at the end of the day, the European Court of Human Rights will consider whether these restrictions are legitimate, whether they have legitimate aim, whether they are proportional. And in this report, the rapporteur strongly relies on the conclusions of the Venice Commission, on rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, so there is absolutely no reason to feel insulted by this, because we all declare our adherence to our values of the Council of Europe. So, dear colleagues, this is not the end of the story. The freedom of NGOs is one of the key issues on the agenda of our committee. We will certainly continue this work. This is not the last report on the issue. And to conclude, I would like to invite all those members who are unhappy with this report to open dialogue. Let's talk, let's try together to fix serious problems in Europe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šilevich, for your speech, but particularly for your report. That was a very good work. You have actually 2 hats in this occasion. You are both the rapporteur, but you are also the chair of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. And because of that, I will not ask you to give the opinion of the committee, but I'm asking the vice chair of the committee, Mr. Kairidis, to make the committee report comments. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Kairidis. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening from Athens. It's my first day in that job, and I'm particularly glad to give you the opinion of our committee. Dear President, dear colleagues, on behalf of the committee, I fully support this report, which deals with a very important matter for the respect of democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. NGOs are a key component of a democratic civil society and make an essential contribution to the development and realization of the core values of the Council of Europe. As parliamentarians, we often take advantage of civil society's input in our daily work. Some of us come from civil society itself. Therefore, it's regrettable that in some Council of Europe member states, new constraints are still being placed on NGOs, and the space for civil society seems to be shrinking. We should condemn this, and such a situation goes against well-established international standards on freedom of association and other human rights. We must defend the watchdog role of NGOs and take all the necessary measures to ensure their greater participation in public debate and legislative works. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. And now we are considering the amendments for the report and obviously the final reports also. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights have presented a draft resolution for this item, as you have noticed, and to which 2 amendments have been tabled. There is also a recommendation to which also 2 amendments have been tabled. We will start with the resolution, and then we'll take up the recommendation. The amendments will be taken in the order in which they appear in the combination, as you have already the habit here. And I remind you, obviously, that the speaking time is now 1 minute. We start with amendment number 1, and I have been informed that the committee has rejected the amendment number 1 by the 2/3 majority. And an objection for that one requires 10 members. And please, now you can show, are you objecting it? I'm both here in hemicycle and also online. We are calculating together. So who are objecting this rejection? Please show your hands. It's already clear it's objected in the hall. We have adequately people. So that means that we will consider the amendment number. It was number 1, yes. I call Mr. Slutsky to support the amendment number 1. Please, Mr. Slutsky, пожалуйста. He is not in the hall. That means that does anyone else? Mr. Abarov, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned before, this report refers in detail 8 countries. But in draft resolution, in the paragraph 4, it only mentions 3 countries. So anyway, both draft resolution and memorandum, the report in detail, will be both published. But in the introductory part, it will be better if either we have all the names of the country or remove all of them. So therefore, I support, for the sake of impartiality, let's accept this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And somebody against? Not from the hall, neither from the line. Then, oh, Chilovich, please. Jason.
Thank you, President. Yes, indeed, the problems are in many countries of the Council of Europe, but what does matter is the scale of the problems. And indeed, the rapporteur singled out the most extreme cases and mentioned only those countries where this disproportional burden and unjustified restrictions put on NGOs are the most clear and the most salient. So this is why I believe it's indeed quite justified that the rapporteur mentioned those countries with the most serious problems with this regard. Thank you.
That was the opinion of the rapporteur, and the committee opinion, please, Mr. Kairidis.
The committee has rejected the amendment by a 2/3 majority.
Now we move to the vote, and you already know the voting system. I will not repeat that one. The vote is declared open now. will be closed. Vote is closed now, and the results. It is rejected, but not in that majority as in the committee, but rejected. Now we move to amendment number 4, and I call Mr. Slutsky to support amendment number 4. 1 minute. Someone else, because Mr. Slutsky is not around, who would speak for the amendment? Madam Rukavichenko, пожалуйста.
Большое спасибо. Я хочу выступить в поддержку этой поправки и сослаться на то, что в параграфах 6 и 7 идут ссылки на недавно принятые Ассамблеей резолюции. В финальной стадии подготовки находится еще одна, в тексте которой имеется поддержка НПО, работающих в области защиты национальных меньшинств. В связи с этим мы хотим добавить вот эту часть, касающуюся работы и защиты национальных меньшинств.
Thanks. Is anybody against? Please, one. Пожалуйста, yes.
Thank you, dear Chair. I think that we have to reread this beautiful amendment, because under the national minorities protection, it lies various and obvious things which are hidden as the intentions to intervene into sovereign countries and protect those people who don't need those protection. So I would like to speak against this amendment. Thank you, dear Chair.
The person who was against was Madam Maria Mezentseva. And now the committee opinion.
The committee has approved this amendment, amendment number 4.
It has approved, and now we put that issue on the vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed, and the result. Amendment number 4 is approved. We move to the overall draft resolution. And now it's the whole draft resolution we will be voting, and the vote is open, please. I heard that it's not yet opened remotely, so it takes a bit of time. Wait. Now it's open also remotely. Let's wait a few seconds still. Seems to be okay. The vote is closed, and the result. The draft resolution is approved. Now we will move to the recommendation side, and there are 2 amendments, as I mentioned already earlier, and they will come to the order which they are in your compendium. Amendment number 2 for the recommendation side. Here is once again the same problem that the 2/3 majority has rejected in the committee. So I will ask once again, are there 10 members here in the hall and in remote in participating in this meeting who are against the rejection, who are objecting the rejection? 10 are needed. I see a few hands here. 2, at least here, 3. It's objected, so it means that the amendment number 2 is rejected. Oh, it was okay. Sorry. It was objected. I apologize. It has been so that there were more than 10 members who objected the rejection. So we will move to voting on this amendment number 2. Once again, I'll ask Mr. Slutsky, who doesn't seem to be on the line. Is there somebody else who would like to defend amendment number 2? Who would defend it? Irina, are you there? Yes. Пожалуйста.
Большое спасибо. В меморандуме докладчика имеется раздел о наилучших практиках государств в отношении НКО. В связи с этим предлагается поручить Комитету министров Совета Европы провести глубокий анализ и распространить эту практику среди государств-членов.
Thank you. Anybody against? Mr. Chilevich, yes.
Thank you, President. Yes, I fully agree with Mrs. Rukavishnikova on substance, but this is simply redundant due to procedural reasons, because the draft recommendation speaks exactly about this, taking stock of progress. This certainly implies also the overview of best practices. So if we adopt this amendment, we simply repeat the same things twice, and out of purely editorial...
Rapporteur mentioned already committee opinion, but let's have a confirmation. The Vice Chair of the committee.
Yes, the committee has rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority.
Thanks a lot. Now we will vote. The vote is open. Vote is waiting a few seconds still. Vote is closed, and the results. Amendment number 2 is rejected. We move to the amendment number 3. Once again, the same problem. It was rejected by the committee by two-thirds majority. We need 10 people, 10 members who will object this rejection. One, two, three, at least here, 4 in hemicycle. How it are? It is objected, so it means that we shall move to the vote. Once again, it's Mr. Slutsky who is not around. Madam Irina Rukavishnikova, maybe, пожалуйста, если вы хотите, пожалуйста. И можете говорить за этого. Пожалуйста, Ирина.
Большое спасибо. Уважаемые коллеги, я хочу напомнить, что почти половина стран-членов Совета Европы не входит в Европейский Союз. С другой стороны, в Европе имеется ряд других региональных международных организаций. И, на наш взгляд, выделение только одной представляется некорректным, в связи с чем мы просим убрать из пункта 1.8 слова «и Европейского Союза». Спасибо.
Thank you. Anyone against? Maybe Boris? Nobody. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, President. Indeed, this amendment seeks to delete the European Union from the list of organizations with which the Council of Europe is going to cooperate. But still, it's true what Mrs. Rukavishnikova said. Not all member states of the Council of Europe are also member states of the European Union, but majority is. and many others have some association agreements, participate in different programs, and after all, Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union is doing a lot of work with regard to NGOs, so we have traditionally established cooperation with the European Union, and the committee believes that partnership with the European Union is very important for us. So this is why I am against.
Thanks, Alexei. Excuse me, I couldn't allow you because Boris Silevich took the chair, so it's okay. Now, committee opinion.
The committee has rejected the amendment by a 2/3 majority, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. And now the vote. The vote is open. Vote is closed. The result. Amendment number 3 is rejected. Now we'll look the whole draft recommendation. And now the vote is about the whole recommendation. The vote is open. Vote is closed. The draft recommendation is adopted. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in final stage of this afternoon session. The Assembly will hold its next public meeting sitting tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have the first item, I suppose, is the credentials of the Russian delegation as the item number 1. This sitting is now adjourned. Nice evening for everybody, irrespective of the curfew. Try to enjoy the evening, and we'll see tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock here in Hemicycle. Thanks. This meeting is ended.